whenever she could. It was natural for Scarlett to be wary of her. She just wished it didn't have to be this way. With a sigh, she pushed her thoughts of Ruby away. Ruby would always be a worry, but nothing had changed there tonight. What had changed was that Ronan was gone, and everyone else was now falling apart. He was gone, and he wasn't coming back. As the thought re-registered in her mind, a gaping hole opened in her chest, and she suddenly felt as though she couldn't breathe. Not wanting to alarm Scarlett, and having a natural aversion to showing weakness in front of anyone, even family, she pulled herself forward and stood up. 1 minute, she managed to mutter as she walked out of the room with a casualness that belied her inner turmoil. Once in the hallway, she sped up, almost running into her own room and through to the walk-in dressing room. Quietly closing the door, she went to the back of the closet, and deep, heaving sobs finally made their way out of her chest. She squeezed her eyes shut and tried to control them, but they wouldn't be controlled. Her brother was gone. It was real. It had really happened. As the realization finally hit her properly, she fell to the floor and bent over, putting her forehead to the ground as the pain flowed out through her tears. It had all been for nothing. Raising him, loving him, protecting him, carving out a life for him to raise his own family in, had all been pointless. Because he was gone. She, his big sister, Lily Drew, had failed. Chapter 18. Kath sat on the edge of her bed and stared at the picture on the wall in front of her. It was of their wedding day, of her and Ronan about to start their big life adventure together. That's what he'd always said to her, that life was the biggest adventure of all. Except now his adventure was over, and he'd left her all alone to carry on with hers. She wiped a stray tear that ran down her face. It had been just over a week since the night they'd found out he'd been killed. Just over a week since their whole world had come crashing down. The first few days were a bit hazy in Kath's memory now. She'd screamed and shouted and then completely lost the plot once Lily had turned up. She remembered that. Seeing her there standing in the hallway had been like a red flag, salt in the freshly carved wound in her heart. In the end, the police had called an ambulance, and she'd been taken to some sort of hospital where she'd been sedated. They'd kept her in for a couple of days until she'd calmed down, and all their tests concluded that she wasn't an actual risk to anyone. She'd felt so guilty then, when Scarlett had come to collect her. Her beautiful daughter was so young, yet she'd left her alone to cope with the news of her father's death, with no one but Lily to help her through it. And the boys, of course, but they were no substitute for her own mother. She looked down to the ring she was slowly twisting in her hands. It was a simple band, platinum, thick and strong. It was the only thing of Ronan's she'd been able to get back so far. The coroner was refusing to release his body until they'd worked out exactly what had happened, and so she hadn't been able to arrange a funeral or sort anything out because they were all just stuck in this strange limbo. She wiped another tear from her cheek. A soft tapping sounded at the door, and then Scarlett's head appeared as she leaned round it. "Hey," she said. "Are you coming down? I've made us a cuppa." "Yeah, all right, love," she replied, her voice barely stronger than a whisper. "I'll be right there." She tried to smile, but could feel it barely made it halfway up her face. Scarlett tried smiling back, but Kath could see the same strain she felt echoed in her daughter's face. "Great. You remember Aunt Lil is coming over today, don't you?" Scarlett asked tentatively. Kath exhaled heavily. Lily had tactfully kept her distance since the night they'd been given the news, but now that the dust had settled, Kath knew the issue needed to be addressed. She had lashed out at her terribly and said things that could never be unsaid. But they were family, and right now, for better or worse, they all needed to stick together and get through the storm they found themselves in. Because that's just what they did, and it's what Ronan would have wanted them to do. "I remember," she said quietly. As if on cue, a car pulled up outside, and 2 doors opened and slammed before footsteps sounded on their way up to the house. There was a pause, and then the doorbell rang. Lily had obviously decided against just walking in on this occasion. Kath closed her eyes for a moment. "I'll go and let them in," Scarlett started. "No, don't." Kath stopped her. "I'll go. It should be me." "Oh, okay. I'll give you a minute then." "Thanks." She shot Scarlett a brave smile and stood up, slipping Ronan's ring back onto her necklace and fastening it around her neck. She opened the front door and stepped aside, gesturing for Lily and Killian to come in. Lily glanced at her warily as she entered, and Kath stalled her with a hand on her arm. "You don't have to stop using your key, Lily," she said. "We're still sisters by marriage. This is still a family home." Lily stared at her for a long moment. "Thank you, Kathleen," she said. "That's good to know." She walked through to the kitchen, her black heels tapping loudly on the hard floor, and her stance unusually rigid as the elephant in the room grew more prominent. "Is Scarlett around?" she asked eventually. "She is," Kath replied. "Look, Lil." She sighed and looked away, her fingers fiddling with a loose button on her top. "I was in a state the other night." "There's no need to explain," Lily said. "It was a hard shock for all of us. We all say things we don't mean in times of stress." "But that's just it, Lil." Kath turned to look at her, raw sadness in her eyes. "I'm not going to pretend I didn't mean it, because I did. I've made no secret of my distaste for the darker side of this family's business over the years, and we all know it was you who drove it from the beginning." Killian stepped back and leaned against the counter with a silent whistle, bowing out of the exchange. Whilst he would defend his mother to the end, he obviously knew this wasn't his battle to fight. This was too personal. Kath swallowed as Lily stood stock still, her expression unreadable. When Lily still didn't say anything, she continued. It was now or never to tell Lily the things she needed to say. "I was just speaking my mind when I said those things, so I can't apologise for that. But what I am sorry for is the way I attacked you with it." She nodded. "I am sorry for that. Because we are family, and there's love here, and I know that you would never have wished harm on Ronan. You've tried to protect him your whole life." She gave her a sad smile. "I know you have, more than anyone. But your lifestyle, the choices you made, they're the reason it's come to this. That's just a simple truth. And I can't pretend it's not." She sniffed and wiped under her eye as a tear threatened to fall. "But it is what it is, and there's no changing it. So there's no point discussing it further. We just need to stick together now, more than ever. That's all I wanted to say." Lily stared out of the window, into the garden, folding her arms across her chest. Kath watched as she stood there, saw the wobble in her bottom lip and the tears form in her eyes. She saw, too, the strength with which she clenched her jaw and the rapid blinking to dispel these signs of what Lily would see only as weakness. After a few moments, she cleared her throat. "Well, I'm glad that's all you wanted to say, Kath," she said, her tone flat and as unreadable as her expression. "Now we can put that entire conversation to bed. Because, like you say, we need to just stick together now." Kath opened her mouth, but then closed it again, unsure how to react to that statement. She wasn't sure what she'd expected Lily to say. What was there to say? Lily could have taken offence and argued, but that wouldn't have got them anywhere. And what was the alternative? She stood awkwardly for a moment. As she dithered, Lily abruptly changed the subject. "Killian, I see there's a pot of tea on the table. Please would you pour everyone a cup?" she ordered. "Sure," Killian replied, clearly relieved to be given something to do. Lily caught the swiftly veiled look of surprise at her lack of reaction as he turned to the task. Kath had invited a row more blatantly than a neon sign, but although every wounded atom in her body ached to respond, she didn't. The family was already fractured. The last thing any of them needed was another fallout. Her phone pinged in her pocket, and she pulled it out with a deep, calming breath. "Bugger," she muttered. "What's up?" Killian asked with a frown. "We've got an issue at the factory." She gave him a meaningful look, then turned her attention to Kath. "I'm so sorry, Kath, but we can't stop after all." "Oh, don't worry. I understand," Kath replied. In truth, she didn't understand how Lily could still be working as though nothing had happened. She could barely drag herself out of bed at the moment, consumed with grief over losing Ronan. And yet Lily was still going into the factory and running the business like always. Did Ronan mean so little to her? She mentally swatted away the question as it crept into her mind. Of course Lily cared, but she certainly did have a strange way of showing it. She turned and sat in one of the chairs, exhausted by their exchange. Everything exhausted her at the moment. Scarlett walked in, and Kath turned to her daughter with a frown, looking her up and down. "Why are you dressed all smart?" she asked. "I'm going into the office," Scarlett said, glancing at her aunt. "If that's okay with you?" "Of course," Lily replied. If she was surprised, she didn't show it. Kath's eyebrows, on the other hand, shot up into her hairline. "What?" she asked, aghast. "You can't be serious. Your father has just died, Scarlett." "I'm well aware of that," Scarlett replied. "And that's exactly why I'm going." She turned to Lily. "I know you said there won't be a trail, but I have to look. I have to search his office and go through everything. There might be something he overlooked, some crumb trail we can follow. I can't just sit here not knowing what happened. I can't do nothing." Emotion coloured her tone. "We need to find out who the hell did this, and why." Lily nodded her understanding. "No, Scarlett, you need to be at home. Leave this to the police," Kath argued. "They're looking into it." "But they aren't, Mum," Scarlett replied. "At least not in the right places." She took a deep breath. "They aren't looking at the side of Dad's world that he hid." "And neither should you," Kath shot back, alarmed. "It's dangerous." "And no one knows just how dangerous, Mum," Scarlett argued. She rubbed her forehead, stressed. "For all we know, this could just be the beginning. We could all be in danger. We need to figure it out." "Well, then let your aunt and cousins handle it." Kath looked to Lily for support, but found none. "Lily?" "I need to keep busy, Mum." Scarlett's voice wobbled. "I can't just keep sitting here waiting. It's driving me insane." "I need to keep busy or I'm going to break," she admitted. "I need to find out what happened to Dad. And I need to help Aunt Lil out at the factory too, because despite the fact our world has stopped, the rest of it keeps on turning." She made to leave before her mother could argue further. "I'm still here for you, Mum, and I'm not going to do anything dangerous, I promise you. I'm just going to the office. I'll be home in a few hours." Kath stared after her, a look of horror on her face, then turned her gaze to Lily. "Lil, I don't want her going into all that. You know I don't." "She's part of this family, Kath. She has every right to look into this, and she's also a grown woman," she added. "I know you don't want to hear this, but she has to make her own choices. You can't keep her wrapped up in cotton wool forever." Kath opened her mouth to reply, but then shut it again, turning away as tears formed in her eyes. She didn't want Scarlett anywhere near that factory, anywhere near any of it. But clearly she wasn't going to find an ally in Lily, even after what had happened to Ronan. Killian made to move after his cousin, and Lily quickly followed suit before further conversations were forced. She wasn't going to argue with Scarlett. She wanted the girl there. "I'll see you Sunday, Kath," she said. "The family dinner at my house, like always." "Except it ain't like always, is it, Lil?" Kath responded sadly. "Because Ronan's gone. It will never be the same again." The two women stared at each other for a long, heavy moment. "No," Lily said eventually. "It won't." Chapter 19. Killian split off to take a call, and Lily followed Scarlett up the metal stairs towards the offices, watching her carefully. The girl had been silent on the car ride over, and she hadn't pushed her. Scarlett would talk in her own time. They reached the door to her office, and Lily reached out and touched her arm. "Listen, this isn't really factory business, what's going on inside there. Why don't you sit in your..." She hesitated. "In the other office until we're done. It shouldn't take long." Scarlett glanced at the door to Ronan's office, and a fleeting look of fear passed over her face. She didn't want to be alone in there just yet, Lily guessed. Her gaze moved towards Lily's door, and her clear grey-blue eyes hardened. "No," she said resolutely. "I want to join you." She looked at her aunt and lifted her chin. "I need to find out what happened to my dad, and I'm probably not going to figure it out on my own in the office. If you let me, I'd like to sit in." Lily nodded. "If you're sure, then of course you can. But be aware, Scarlett." She gave her a hard stare. "The more people who see you at meetings like these, the more word will spread that you've joined the firm." "Except I haven't," Scarlett replied quickly. "No, you haven't." Lily's gaze travelled across her niece's face critically. I won't lie to you and pretend I don't want you here. I do. More than ever now. You know your father did too, she pressed. And it is still your decision. But be warned. Her level gaze intensified. This isn't the corporate world. You can't dip in and out as you please. Once you start playing this game, you're in. And once you're in, there is no escape clause. You can't just hand your notice in. Once you're in for life. So, you can come into this meeting with me today, but you need to make a decision, and quickly. Are you part of this firm, this life, or are you not? Because if not, then you need to tie up whatever business you feel you still have here and start packing your things for Scotland. Because going there and leaving all this behind, that's the only way you can truly separate yourself for good. Scarlett swallowed, clearly at a loss as to how to answer. Giving her one more hard look, Lily turned and walked into the office. "Lily Drew, it's so good to see you," came an overly enthusiastic voice from one of the chairs by the coffee table at the side of the room. The voice belonged to a tall, awkward-looking man who watched Lily, but whose eyes constantly flickered away as if looking directly at her pained him somehow. His companion didn't seem to have the same affliction, watching Lily with dead eyes and an uninterested expression. "Harry Snow. I would say the same, but we'd both know I was lying." Lily didn't bother to fake a smile as she crossed the room and took the seat behind the desk that Connor had just vacated. He stepped back and stood behind her, a menacing look in his dark brown eyes. They flicked momentarily to his cousin with curiosity, but then rested back on the newcomers in the room. Harry chuckled, the sound a strained mixture of amusement and stress. "You always were direct, weren't you? So very direct." "What do you want, Harry?" Lily asked, folding her hands in her lap and narrowing her gaze. Harry Snow had extorted them so many times when they'd had no other options that they were way beyond fake pleasantries. "To offer my condolences," Harry replied, his head snapping to the side with a nervous tick as he forced himself to look at her. Lily resisted the urge to curl her lip in disgust. He reminded her of a snake, a broken, dysfunctional snake that was always ready to strike, even when it looked weak. She looked down to the silver cigarette box on the desk and opened it, lighting one up. She purposely didn't offer one to her guest, despite knowing he smoked. "That's interesting, Harry," she said, "that you would come all this way to offer us your condolences. Did they run out of cards at the corner shop?" Her quiet tone was laced with subtle sarcasm. Harry chuckled once more and pulled his own cigarettes out of his inner pocket. He lit up and Lily watched him carefully. "The thing is, Harry," she continued, her casual tone hardened by a dangerous edge, "a little birdie told me that you've been talking about causing problems over here with our firm. And then, not a heartbeat later, Ronan is found dead in an alley." Her dark eyes grew colder, never leaving his face. "And then suddenly, out of the blue, I find you here in my office. Now." She took a drag on her cigarette and blew out the smoke slowly. "What should I make of that, do you think?" "Let me guess," Harry replied, a humourless half-smile pulling up one side of his weathered face. "That little birdie of yours was none other than good old Raymondo," he mocked. "Am I right?" "I wouldn't let him hear you call him that. He might think you're taking the piss, Harry," Lily replied dryly. Harry's twitching gaze locked with hers for a few seconds before he pulled it away.
That's the reason I'm here. To stop that little mind of yours barking up trees that ain't right. I am looking to expand some businesses that might concern you at some point in the future, yes.
He nodded.
But I didn't have anything to do with Ronan. I had no reason to want him dead. He was a good customer. I'll be sad to see that income go, to be honest.
We are good customers, Harry, Lily corrected. And your income from this firm won't be changing any time soon. Assuming, of course, that I don't find out that you were responsible for my brother's death. Harry's eyebrows rose and he glanced at her with interest. Lily wasn't surprised by this reaction. In the past, especially at the beginning, they had fought for their position in a very biased world. A man's world where women were seen as weaker beings. It had served them well to use Ronan as the face of the business. But times had changed, and although there would always be some bias remaining, it was time to make the true situation known. Lily was the hard rod of steel behind everything they did, and those who assumed she was just hanging off Ronan's shirt tails were about to be in for a rude awakening.
I see,
Harry said, his tone calculating.
You feel confident you can take over from your brother now that he's gone?
Let's clear something up, shall we? Lily proposed, the cold smile on her face not reaching her eyes. I'm not taking over from Ronan, because we were equal business partners from the start. My brother and I crawled up from the gutters of life to everything we have now, together. She lifted her chin proudly. We've known every level of desperation and every victory on our way up the ladder as a team. To be completely clear, there has been no bridge crossed, no dirty deed that Ronan has ever done that I haven't done right alongside him, and would do again on my own with no qualms whatsoever. It was veiled, but a clear threat just the same. After a few long seconds, Harry held his hands up in defeat with a smile.
I meant no offence to you. I am of course aware of your standing. I meant only to refer to the additional workload on your shoulders now that there is only one of you, where once there were two.
Lily swallowed the lump of grief that sat in her throat, not willing to let Harry Snow see her pain. He was lying about what he had meant by his question. His expression had betrayed him. This was a backtrack, but it mattered little. What mattered the most right now was finding out what had happened to Ronan. It had been a week, and the police had come up with nothing, which meant it was down to her to find out which underworld lowlife had decided to take her brother out. And it had to be someone from the underworld. A rookie or chancer wouldn't be able to get away so cleanly without leaving evidence. She was sure of it. Her inquiries had got her nowhere so far, but they would eventually. No one could hide forever. I'm not alone in running this company, nor was it just myself and Ronan before he was killed. This is a family firm, and I have many extra pairs of hands to make sure nothing interferes with the smooth running of our businesses. So you need not concern yourself.
Oh, yes, your sons are indeed fine men.
Harry's mouth curled up into a smile of amusement once more.
And this?
He turned his sly gaze toward Scarlet.
This must be the heir apparent.
His flickering gaze moved up and down as he studied her curiously.
You'll certainly be an interesting one to watch.
Lily didn't respond to this probe. He was looking for confirmation, but as yet she had none to give. She watched Scarlett's jaw clench, and her gaze cool as she stared back at Harry. She didn't look away as many did when he turned his attention to them. Good girl, she thought. Stand your ground.
Anyway,
Harry stood up stiffly.
Like I said, I had nothing to do with Ronan's death. My men and I were over near Bristol with your beloved Ray, setting up a new transport stop. Feel free to check with him to validate my alibi. I'm sure you'll trust his word more than mine.
By miles, she replied dryly. But I'm actually already aware of that. She stubbed out her cigarette in the ashtray on her desk with neat precision. You were the first person I asked about. Her tone sharpened, along with her gaze. If I hadn't already discovered your watertight alibi, you certainly would have seen me long before today, and it would not have been such a civil meeting.
Oh,
he smirked.
Promises, Lily.
He smiled, the action strange on his naturally pained face.
I will be sure to ask around about Ronan and let you know should any information come my way, of course. We must stick together in times such as these.
He left the office, his companion following behind.
I'll be seeing you,
he called over his shoulder.
I'll bet,
Lily growled under her breath as the door closed.
Sorry to call you back here, Connor said,
moving forward from his position behind her and sitting down in the seat Harry had vacated.
He just turned up.
It's fine. You did the right thing. What was he looking for just now? Connor mused, staring at the office door with a thoughtful expression. Weakness, Lily replied. She looked over towards Scarlett, who was taking it all in with interest. You're looking for clues, Scar, she said. So here's the first thing you should know. Family are the only ones you can ever freely trust. Other than us, no matter what situation you're in, no matter who's in front of you, you don't show weakness at any time. Not ever. Because the day you show them there's a crack. Her gaze bore into Scarlett's. That's the day they will break you. Chapter 20. Harry Snow sat in the back of the car and stared out of the window, mostly still for once as he turned the meeting over in his mind. He hadn't expected it to go quite the way it had, and it had given him food for thought.
What do you make of that then, boss?
Came the question from the front of the car. Dave, one of his most trusted men and companion in the meeting they'd just left, looked at him in the rear-view mirror. Almost immediately the nervous tick started up, and Harry sighed. He didn't like having to speak to people, even his own men, for this very reason. He couldn't seem to control the jerky movements of his body or the placement of his gaze when he was forced into conversation. But annoyingly, conversation was a part of his life, and so, as always, he forced himself to make the effort.
I'm not quite sure yet, he answered. Do you think there's going to be an issue with the market rollout? Dave asked. Most definitely, he responded with a nod.
He was surprised that Lily had heard about his new business plans. He'd been careful to keep them quiet and away from Ray Renshaw especially, knowing he would always have Lily's best interests at heart. But it appeared he hadn't been quite careful enough. Now that she knew, she would have her guard up. And she'd brought some fight to the table too, which he hadn't expected. It had been a mistake to assume she was the lesser of the duo. Ronan had always been the front man, the one who conducted their meetings and agreed their terms. He'd been a formidable man with a temper no one in their right mind would want to get on the wrong side of. He had assumed that it was he who had put their little firm on the map, not the petite, quiet sister sitting in the shadows of every meeting, ever watching and listening. He'd made a colossal error in judgment there. He'd hoped that with Ronan's death the firm would now be vulnerable. He'd envisioned Lily walking in with red-rimmed eyes and a defeated stoop, accepting his condolences as a broken woman, scared and worried about the future now that their leader had passed. It would have been ideal. He could have swooped in and offered to buy her out of the market stalls, offered to take a load off her shoulders and give her finances a cushion for a while. He'd imagined how grateful she would have been as he offered what would have appeared to be a generous amount to the unsavvy sister of the deceased crime boss. But that hadn't been an unsavvy tag-along, and there had been nothing broken about the woman at all. The person who'd walked into that office today was as hard as steel. It had been a real surprise. She had never revealed that side of herself in front of him before. She'd had Ronan do all the heavy talking when they'd found it necessary. It was a clever move, really. He had to give her that. Because now it was he who was wrong-footed, and Lily was well in control. This was why he'd gracefully retreated before any real talk of the markets came up. His idea of swooping in as some sort of business-minded saviour in her time of need wasn't going to cut it with this Lily Drew. Certainly not at the price he'd been thinking of offering. He'd have to revise his strategy.
"What are you thinking now, then?"
Dave asked.
"I'm not sure yet," Harry replied. "We could still go in with an offer. If she turns it down, we'll just take what we need anyway," he mused. "Then again, maybe we should skip the pleasantries, save the money, and take it straight away."
He stared out of the window at the passing cars with a slight frown.
"But then, if we haven't at least tried to be reasonable, we'll upset Ray quite significantly, and of course, Ray is a very valued customer."
He pursed his lips.
"We shall have to think about it."
Harry had fallen into a life of crime partly by accident many years before. His father had passed down an oddly mismatched handful of successful businesses that were dotted around the country. Among other things, Harry had inherited a haulage company, a small shipping fleet, several toy stores, an industrial bakery, and a finance company. He'd quickly seen the potential for extra money and had built up a network of men who assisted in making all the right connections with all the wrong people. He'd tripled his income almost overnight, and now many of the smaller firms in big cities, such as the Drews, counted on his services to allow them to smoothly run their jobs. Now Harry was looking to expand across London by taking over some of the busier markets. Clients often needed a fluid, fast-moving sales outlet, and whilst he was able to help them with all sorts of transportation, laundering and loans, he wasn't currently able to offer any sort of decent sales channel. It irked him to have to say no when there was so much more money to be made. And now that his son had made a potentially very lucrative new deal, dependent on having this sort of outlet, it was time to change this.
"Things are changing in London, Dave," he said as he continued to stare at the passing cars, unseeing. "Power is not a static entity. It's not something you're born with or can hold on to indefinitely. It's ever moving, accorded to those with the right mindset and the right tools at the right time."
He sat back in the chair.
"I may have underestimated Lily Drew, but they're still vulnerable now that Ronan has gone. And their power was never that far-reaching anyway. However we decide to proceed, we will get what we want."
His gaze darkened determinedly.
"And the Drews will fade further and further until they're nothing but a memory of a firm that was a player in the big game once upon a time."
Chapter 21. Scarlett sat at the small desk at the side of her room where once she had sat to do her homework, but which now doubled as a dressing table. She stared into the mirror, and serious grey-blue eyes stared back. These eyes held no answers to the questions in her mind, but still she kept on staring as though some might magically appear. The room was almost in darkness as the evening swiftly fell, but she barely noticed. When it became so dark she could no longer see, she switched on the desk lamp. As the small circle of warm light fell across the desk, her eyes were drawn down to the prospectus for St. Andrew's. She felt the familiar pull as she opened the first page and looked down at the list of facilities. It looked like such a wonderful place. Somewhere she yearned to call her own, a place she dreamed of being part of. And that dream was about to become a reality. Her course was set. Her room in halls had been allocated, and her list of books had been emailed over to her. The future she'd worked so hard for, had studied through so many long nights for, was finally about to happen. It was all she'd thought about since the day she'd received her acceptance letter. But how was she supposed to leave now? How could she abandon her mother? How could she leave London without knowing who killed her father and why? And on top of all of that, how on earth was she supposed to turn her back on the family business now? Raised voices wafted up the stairs and through her bedroom door, and Scarlett tilted her head to the side with a small frown. It sounded like her aunt, though she hadn't realised she was even here. She must have come to visit her mother. As another sharp retort sounded, she opened the door and made her way downstairs to find out what was going on. As she descended, she caught sight of her mother and Aunt Lily standing in the lounge, facing each other. Her mother had her hands on her hips, and Lily stood ramrod straight with her chin held high in defiance. Neither of these were a good sign. "I don't care what you say about it, Lily Drew," Kath snarled. "It ain't happening. I ain't losing her the way I've lost Ronan, so she's going to bloody Scotland, and that's the end of it. You want to ship your only daughter off to Scotland just weeks after her father's died. Is that what you're telling me?" Lily shouted back. "You want to split this family even more than it has been already." "Yes, I do," Kath retorted strongly. "Ronan is dead. I don't want the same for her. So if that means getting her as far away from this family as possible, then so be it." "You can't mean that," Lily replied with a small growl of frustration. "I know you don't mean that. You don't want to lose her too. And you don't want her to be alone up there, to struggle through her loss without the very people around who love her, who raised her." "You did not raise her!" Kath cut her off with an angry roar. "I raised her! Me and Ronan!" Scarlett ran forward, breaking free of the shock which had caused her to pause. "Jesus, stop this, both of you!" she exclaimed. Neither seemed to hear her, each locked in their own side of the battle. "I may not be her mother, but we've all raised our children together," Lily replied, her words full of emotion. "We all picked them up when they cried, cleaned their scraped knees, taught them to be who they are. It takes a village, Kath, and we're her village. You can't just cut her off from that. And you can't take away the fact that the firm is the beating heart of this family. It provides our lifeblood, the money we need to live, to survive." "Guys!" Scarlett begged. She couldn't bear to see them at each other's throats like this. Not now, not when they needed to stick together. "That's not true," Kath argued, turning away and putting her hands to her face. "It is true. and you know it." Lily drove it home, seeing the crack in Kath's argument. "Everything you have is down to that business, whether you like it or not."
"Stop this!"
Scarlett tried to step in between them, but Kath pushed her out of the way with a sweep of her arm and stuck her finger in Lily's face in fury.
"She is not joining you in the fucking underworld,"
Kath shot back, rounding on Lily once more with a face full of thunder.
"I am not sending her off with you towards the dangers that killed my husband. I will send her off to university. I will get her away from you." "I said, stop it!"
Scarlett suddenly roared, her temper snapping. Both of them turned to look at her, finally taking note that she was there. She glared at each of them in turn.
"I'm sick of this. You need to stop tearing into each other like you're enemies. We're family," she stressed. "And right now we need each other more than ever."
"Exactly," Lily cried, turning back towards Kath. "We need to stay together."
"She is going,"
Kath replied, incensed.
"She can talk for herself,"
snapped Scarlett.
"And she is not going anywhere."
They both turned back to her, their attentions caught.
"Scarlett,"
Kath began.
"No, Mum, I'm done. The decision is mine and it's been made."
The last hope in her heart of going to St. Andrews died as she realised she couldn't leave. Not now, not ever. This was her life. This was her destiny and her duty, and there was no point trying to ignore it any longer.
"I'm not going anywhere. I'm joining the firm,"
she confirmed, her tone resolute.
"And there is nothing more to be said about it."
Chapter 22. Connor rolled over and collapsed next to Chastity with a sound of contentment. His bare chest was slick with sweat, and he took a few moments to catch his breath. Chastity curled up into his arm as he half-heartedly pulled her close. She ran a long, manicured nail down his torso.
"Well, well, Tiger,"
she purred.
"It seems you did miss me after all."
"Apparently so," he replied. He guessed he had in a way. Her body anyway. He wasn't so sure about the rest of her. She was getting on his wick if he was being honest. But she had this way about her when it came to sex, which just seemed to mesmerize him. He'd never been with a woman with such skill in the bedroom, so he endured the whining and the high-maintenance ways for now.
"We still really do need to talk about your mum, though," she pushed.
"Ah, yes," he remembered. That's what she'd been trying to do. He sat up and gently pushed her off, reaching over to grab his t-shirt and pulling it over his head. She shuffled up onto her elbow and watched him, her long blonde locks falling down over her pert breasts as she angled herself attractively.
"If we're going to make this work, we need to warm her up to me somehow. Surely you want your mum to like me?"
she asked. Connor had his back to her now and rolled his eyes. She had no idea where she really sat in the grand scheme of things. She had no idea that he and Lily knew exactly what game she was playing. "Look, don't worry yourself about all that," he said in a placating tone. "It ain't my mum you're seeing, is it?"
"No, but she's a huge part of your everyday life. I'd like to be able to get on with your family,"
Chastity replied with a stubborn pout. "You get on with Killian?" Connor countered.
"Yes, but if we're ever going to level up in this relationship..."
"Level up?" He cut her off with a laugh. Jesus, this ain't Mario Kart, love. We're just having some fun, ain't we? Chastity's pleasant mask slipped at this comment, but she quickly worked to hide her irritation.
Yeah, of course, she replied with a bright smile. But all this fun we've been having has been the most fun I've ever had with anyone.
She leaned forward, pushing her breasts against him as she pulled him back down.
Isn't it the same for you?
Connor grinned as she began kissing his neck, teasing his skin with her teeth. It certainly has been fun, he answered before gently pulling away. But right now, I need to stop having fun and get dressed. Killian will be here in a second, and I need to go. Can you see yourself out, yeah?
Yeah, sure,
she replied, her disappointment obvious. Connor stood up and hid his irritation. She'd been hinting for a while that she wanted to get serious and maybe even move in, but that was never going to happen. Yes, she was a lot of fun, but that was all it was ever going to be. He couldn't take someone like her seriously. She played the part, but they both knew why she was really there. She used him for his money, so he used her for her body. It was no more than a business transaction when it really came down to it. He didn't feel bad about this. He'd never pretended to her that it was anything more than that. It wasn't his fault if she chose not to listen. He reached for his deodorant and sprayed liberally under his arms, then quickly smoothed his dark hair in the mirror. It was time to set her loose, really. But her ample assets kept him from pressing the release button. Pulling his trousers on, he shot her a brief smile as the knock at the door sounded. That'll be my brother. I'll catch you later.
Okay, so when are you thinking? Are you free tonight?
Not tonight. I'll text you, he called back over his shoulder as he opened the door. Killian chuckled with amusement, and Connor rolled his eyes once more. Bye. He shoved his feet into his shoes, grabbed his jacket from the peg by the door, and walked out quickly before she could reply. How's the missus? Killian asked, tongue-in-cheek. Shut up, Connor shot back. She's getting rather attached, that one. Yeah, she's been on about trying to win Mum over this morning, Connor admitted. Killian laughed. Good luck with that, he replied. Nah, it ain't happening, Connor said firmly. What, the dazzling chastity ain't the love of your life, brother? Killian mocked. Oh, please, Connor replied with a frown. It'd take a few more brain cells and a few less sticky fingers to fit that description. When I do settle down, it will be with someone who's got a bit of something about them, not a pair of tits on legs who only fancies my wallet. Well, I'd be happy to take her off your hands if she's that much of a problem, Killian said with a jokey wink. Gross, Connor exclaimed, swatting at his brother. And you ain't her type anyway. How can I not be her type? Killian scoffed. I'm literally you, but funnier. He puffed out his chest with a swagger. You ain't as funny as you think, Connor replied. He dodged the sideswipe Killian aimed at him. What's the word today, then? He asked, changing the subject. Dunno. Mum said to meet at the factory. She didn't say any more than that. Did you collect the wedge from the backroom sales? Connor asked. Yeah, grabbed it last night. We'll need to do the rounds with it. It's more than usual, which is great, but not sure where she'll expect us to launder it all, he added with a frown. No, me neither, Connor agreed. He knew his mother had been pushing his uncle to figure out a better way to launder more illicit income for a while now, but he'd been pushing back. Now that his uncle had passed, he couldn't help but see the opportunity for growth. As his uncle reclaimed the space at the very front of his mind, his heart dropped and his frown deepened. "What's up?" Killian asked, noting the change. "Just thinking about Uncle Ro. Can't believe there's still nothing to go on." Lily had got hold of the police report from a friend at the local station, but there had been nothing there that could help them figure out who'd killed him. Ronan had been found in an alleyway in a sleepy village in Essex, somewhere none of them had any reason to go. Him being all the way out there made no sense at all to any of them. His throat had been cut with a sharp knife, but that was all they'd managed to surmise so far. There didn't appear to be any sign of a struggle. All his personal items were still on him, his wallet, his car keys, even his Rolex, and the killer had left no clues behind. The village itself was small and had no cameras nearby which could have picked them up. The nearest main road had an ANPR camera, but the report showed that Ronan hadn't been caught on it coming into the village. If anything, it was as if Ronan had been trying to stay off the radar entirely. It was all a great mystery, and one that was frustrating all of them. "I wish he was here to tell us what to do," Killian admitted quietly. "Me too," Connor replied. He tightened his jaw as a wave of sadness and then anger overtook him for a moment. "Whoever did this is going to fucking pay." "When we find them," Killian added. "When we find them," Connor agreed. "And we need to find them, because right now we don't know what's going on. No one had any reason to top Uncle Ronan." He pulled a grim expression. "So what are we going to do if they ain't done?" They exchanged a look. "I've been wondering the same thing," Killian admitted. "That's why I've been sticking close to Mum. If they're gunning for the firm, she'd be the next in line." Connor exhaled heavily. "There has to be something we've missed, some clue. We'll take another drive up there tonight, see if we can get in with any more of the locals." They had already tried once with no luck, but it was worth another attempt. You never knew who might remember something. His gaze darkened. "Whoever it was is going to rue the day they ever decided to fuck with this family." "Do you think Mum's okay?" Killian asked suddenly. "What do you mean?" "Well, she's just... Aunt Kath has had a breakdown. Scarlett's completely broken. You and I miss him like hell. But Mum just seems to carry on, you know? She seems a bit more stressed than that, but..." He frowned, a confused expression covering his face. "I'm just a bit surprised she ain't more upset." "She is upset," Connor responded with certainty. "She's just as cut up as the rest of us, more so probably. But that's just her way. That's how she copes. You know that," he added. "Yeah, I know. I just thought this would be the thing that really broke her, seeing Uncle Ro gone. They've done everything together their whole lives. And that's why she'll work even harder at hiding it than ever. That's how she's holding it all together." He looked at his watch. "Come on, we'd better get a move on. She'll have our balls for earrings if we keep her waiting too long." As they walked out into the daylight, he made a beeline for his brother's car. Connor knew his mum was hurting. She was as warm and loving and loyal as they came on the inside. But she had a shell made of pure steel, and the deeper the hurt, the harder that shell became. It was the way she'd survived all these years, and it was the way she would keep on surviving all that was still to come. Chapter 23. Connor and Killian walked into Lily's office and closed the door behind them. Lily was on a phone call and Scarlett sat opposite her at the desk. Connor sat beside his cousin with a wink of greeting, and Killian leaned against the sideboard as they waited for their mother to get off the phone. "See to it, you bloody well do!" She slammed the receiver down with an irritated tut and glared at her sons. "What time do you call this?" she asked, raising one pencil-thin eyebrow. "Blame Connor," Killian piped up. "I had to drag him out of Chastity's loving arms." "Ugh!" Lily pursed her lips. "Does that girl not understand the concept of working hours?" Connor shot Killian a scathing look and ignored the talk of chastity entirely. "What's, He glanced at Scarlett. "What's on the agenda today, then?" "It's okay," Lily said, picking up on his hesitancy. She took a deep breath in and gave them a look. "As of now, Scarlett is part of the firm." "Oh," replied Connor with a tone of surprise. He turned to his cousin and looked her up and down thoughtfully. "Really?" he asked with a small frown. "Yes, really," Scarlett replied in a hard tone. She raised one eyebrow at him in question. "I didn't mean... I just meant..." Connor started. "He meant, welcome to the family, love." Killian swooped in smoothly. "The real family." "I've always been part of the family, Killian," Scarlett replied quietly. "But now I'm coming to work too." Killian nodded and gave her a welcoming smile. But Connor just turned to look at Lily. She stared back at him with the same serious expression he knew mirrored his own. Scarlett had always been protected from this side of their life on Kath's demand. Whilst she knew who they were, she had no idea the extent of what went on in the dark hours of the night when she slept. Lily subtly shrugged, and he looked away, shaking his head. He didn't agree with Scarlett joining them. Not right now, at least, with things as they were, but it was apparently already decided. Scarlett was being taken into the fold, and that meant that not only would they be working together, but she was now another person he would have to defend and protect with his life. More responsibility, more weight on his shoulders. "Welcome to the firm," he said, with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Thanks," she replied, with a smile that didn't quite reach hers. "With that in mind, I need you to take Scarlett out with you today on the laundry rounds, Connor," Lily said. "I have to sort out a supplier issue. The Egypts who supply our rubber fucked up the last delivery at a colossal level, which is the 3rd time this year. I need to find someone more reliable and figure something out for the orders due to be fulfilled today, so that's going to tie me up for a few hours." "Don't you want to teach Scar about the factory first?" Connor asked. "She's going to pick that up as she goes," Lily replied with a dismissive wave. "It's a smooth enough operation here, but there's a lot for her to learn on the outside, so we need to get her education moving." "Okay," Connor conceded. "Killian, I need you elsewhere," Lily continued. "You know Dan, the one with the kebab place who tried to lighten his bag a few weeks back?" "Yeah." "Go to the estate, find some youths looking to make a bit of money and gain some brownie points with us. Get him to smash the place up a bit. Nothing that will shut him down for more than a day or so, but enough to shit him up," she ordered. "Make sure they deliver the reminder that we're watching him, and we haven't forgotten his little indiscretion." Connor glanced at Scarlett. If she was shocked, she didn't let on. Her expression was as smooth as if they were discussing the weather. "Sure thing." Killian saluted his mother and stood up. "Take what cash you need from the day safe," Lily added. "Okay." He buttoned up his jacket and smoothed it down, shooting a charming smile at his young cousin. "Enjoy your first trip out on the rounds," he said cheerfully. "Catch you later." Gillian left the room and Lily turned to Connor. "Right, off you go then. Crack on."
"Right."
Connor exhaled reluctantly.
"Let's go then,"
he said to Scarlett brightly. He followed her out with a lump of concern settling into his stomach. Was Scarlett jumping into the criminal side of their firm really what she wanted, or was it just a knee-jerk reaction to losing her dad? He locked his jaw and his face darkened. He prayed she was here for the right reasons, and that she was strong enough to take what was coming, because if she wasn't, the girl was as good as dead, and there would be nothing but trouble ahead for all of them. Chapter 24. Scarlett slid her gaze sideways towards Connor as he drove. "Where are we heading first?" she asked.
"The Eric and Traby," he answered,
slowing down and turning left at the junction. Scarlett raised her eyebrows, then quickly smoothed her expression, not wanting to let Connor see that she'd reacted. Luckily, he didn't seem to notice. The Eric and Traby estate was an area she'd always been warned to stay away from. It was rife with crime, and small-time gangs warred there regularly. "What interest do we hold in the Eric and Traby?" she asked.
"We provide protection to some small businesses there, and a lot of the people who work for us live there," he replied.
"But what about the gangs?" She looked over at him, concern and curiosity in her eyes.
"They work for us," he replied. "Not exclusively, of course. They have their own things going on. They collect work from firms such as ours whenever they can, and in return we have an understanding. They show us respect and don't touch any of the businesses under our protection."
"Okay." She twisted her lip thoughtfully. "So they're our street-level soldiers, then?" Connor looked sideways at her and nodded approvingly.
"You're getting it."
"So, just to clarify, we're safe in there?" she questioned warily.
"To a degree," he replied. "We need to introduce you, spread the word you're one of us. Expect some pushback at first. They'll test you to see if you're going to hide behind us or whether you can hold your own."
Scarlett nodded. "That's fair enough," she said reasonably.
"You think you're ready for that?" Connor asked.
The look in his dark eyes told her that he didn't, but she ignored it. "Any time," she replied. As they continued down the road, she turned this new information over in her mind. Knowing she was about to come face to face with people from an estate gang initially filled her with dread. Of course it did. It would fill anyone with dread, she reasoned. But she had chosen to step up in the firm, and that meant she needed to harden up and show the underworld that she was her father's daughter. She was no wallflower. She had never been a wallflower, no matter what she'd faced before. She had never had to face anything like this, of course, but she needed to start somewhere. Lifting her chin a little higher, she narrowed her eyes and looked straight ahead. She'd spent her whole life looking up to her father, and now he was gone. She felt her bottom lip wobble as the thought of him sent a spear of grief through her heart and bit down on it hard, clamping her jaw tightly. The wound was still raw. She doubted it would ever not be, so she had to try and work out how to live with it. He'd been her favourite person in the world, and she felt truly lost without him. Life hadn't turned out the way she'd thought it would, and that was hard. But jumping into the firm, taking her place in the machine he'd lovingly built over the years, was already helping her to feel closer to him, and that helped a little. She knew that nothing she could do would bring him back or take away the hollow void his death had left in her heart. And there was another pain, a secondary pain, that came from not knowing what had happened to him. This was the one she was trying to focus on for now. She knew she wasn't the only one who felt it. Everyone wanted to find his murderer and take their revenge. And unlike most families who went through this sort of thing, their family would actually take that revenge. Knowing that felt strangely comforting, but there was still a barrier of frustration that they needed to get through. They still needed to actually find out who it was. Scarlett had methodically searched her father's office drawer by drawer and file by file, but, as Lily had predicted, she'd found nothing relating to the meeting he'd been murdered at. She and Lily had visited several allies in the underworld asking questions, searching for any piece of information that could help them work out what had happened, but so far no one seemed to know a thing. With nothing to go on, Lily had sat down with Scarlett and shared her list of potential subjects. Harry Snow had been at the very top, but had been scribbled out after finding out he'd been miles away with Ray that day. The rest of the names on the list had been scribbled out too, all dead ends. Her aunt had frustratedly admitted she was no closer to finding the murderer, and now that left them with the hard task of taking a closer look at their allies. They'd spent all this time looking at foes, but could it have been a friend?
Here we are.
Connor's voice cut through her thoughts.
Great, let's go.
She was glad to be busy at the moment, to be throwing herself in the way she was. Anything that could distract her from her pain was welcome right now. Scarlett took in the tall brown brick buildings around them as she stepped out of the car. A couple of older women stood talking on the walkway outside their front door a few floors up on the building in front, but they stopped to stare down at the newcomers. A few kids kicked around an old football on the small patch of grass, and a group of young men stood together in an alleyway outside the window of one of the flats where music boomed out loudly. As they caught sight of Connor, one of these men tapped another on the shoulder and whispered something in his ear. He immediately disappeared down the dark alley, leaving Scarlett to wonder what had been said. Taking his time, Connor straightened his jacket, looked around, and lit a cigarette before ambling over to the group. Scarlett followed, staying a couple of steps behind.
Damo.
Connor acknowledged the man who'd whispered in the other's ear. He grasped his hand and briefly patted his shoulder in a familiar way, before letting go and stepping back.
How's it hanging? So-so, Drew, so-so, he replied. What's the word on the next shipment? There's one coming in a couple of weeks. Good load from the sound of it. All High Street. Plenty to go around, Connor said.
The young man who'd disappeared returned and gave Damo a nod. With this, Damo stepped aside with a smile.
Chain's in the shop. He's expecting you.
Scarlett followed Connor down the alleyway, keeping a careful eye on the young men as she passed them. They were all staring at her now, sizing her up with no subtlety at all. They carried on past another block of flats and through to a small row of shops.
Who's Chain? She asked quietly.
He runs a shop selling second-hand tech goods. He's mainly a front. He launders money for us, and his guys back there shift a lot of our goods, Connor replied.
Okay. Why do they call him Chain?
It's his choice of weapon. Connor glanced at her. There's a lot you can do with a chain.
I see.
Scarlett fell silent as they reached the shops. Connor pushed open a door and they entered the tiny, cramped space. Shelves from floor to ceiling were overflowing, and Scarlett had to grab a pack of lightning chargers to stop them falling to the floor when her elbow knocked them. Wiping the dust from the long untouched item from her fingers, she was careful not to knock anything else as they made their way to the back of the shop. A broad man with a brooding expression on his face sat back in the chair behind the counter. He wore a dark tracksuit with a white tank top beneath.
A thick gold chain which Scarlett presumed was one of his choice weapons hung around his neck. He stood up as Connor stopped and towered over the pair of them. His expression lifted into a smile.
"Wagwan, my friend," he said,
his thick East End accent still holding a trace of his Caribbean roots.
"What's up, Chain? Good to see you,"
Connor replied with a brief grin.
"You got something for me?"
Chain asked. He looked Scarlett up and down while Connor reached into his inner jacket pocket. He kissed his teeth and pulled back, looking at her at arm's length.
"What we got here then, bruv? This your bird? This ain't no place for a date, Connor, man. Jeez. At least take her to a Nando's or something. Get some meat in her. She's a bit skinny, innit?"
"She is Connor's cousin, not his date," Scarlett shot back sharply. "And she is also perfectly fine as she is, thank you." She glared at him with a cold, hard expression. Connor had told her she needed to hold her ground, so that was exactly what she was going to do. Connor chuckled as he pulled out the wedge of money wrapped in brown paper. Chain pulled back even further, and his eyebrows shot up so far they almost disappeared into his hairline. He stared at her for a moment. Eventually his eyes flickered up and down her body.
"I don't like your skirt,"
he said, in a low, deliberate tone, narrowing his dark brown eyes.
"Too long for my liking. I like 'em short and sweet, easy access."
"That's okay," she retorted, her level gaze unfaltering. "I don't like your chain. Too blunt a weapon for my liking. I like them sharp and to the point. Much more efficient." There was a short silence, and then suddenly Chain burst out laughing, throwing his head back in mirth.
"Gah! You're all right, you are."
He turned to Connor.
"She's working with you now, is she?"
"Yeah, she is," Connor replied. "This is Scarlett. Scarlett Chain." He gave the introduction and then turned his attention back to the money in his hand. Scarlett relaxed now that the initial tension had been broken. "Good to meet you," she said.
"Likewise."
Chain looked at her critically.
"You're Ronan's girl, that right?"
Scarlett felt her muscles tighten at the mention of her father. "That's right," she said levelly.
"I'm sorry about your dad," Chain said. "He was a good man."
"He was the best," she replied in a low voice, the emotion she was trying to hide sneaking in on the last word. She clamped her mouth shut and turned away, pretending to look at the goods on the shelves. Connor cleared his throat. "Right, so there's 20 grand here. Can you clear that in 2
weeks? Sure."
"Good. I just spoke to Damo out front. We've got a big high street shipment coming in a couple of weeks, so I'll bring some down to you."
"How much?"
Chain asked, putting the wedge of money away under the counter. "Hard to say. It's a medium truckload, but it will be full. Details are a little vague, but it'll be too much to shift through just the stalls, so I'll have a good amount for you." Chain gave another shrug along with a nod of consent.
2 weeks. Okay, I'll have the crew waiting."
"Catch you then." Connor put 2 fingers to his head in a casual salute and walked back out of the shop. Scarlett nodded goodbye and followed, staying silent as they walked back through the estate and past the group of men to the car. She waited until Connor had started the engine and pulled away before she began asking questions. "Why are you bringing goods here? I thought all the high street stuff went through the markets." Connor settled back in his seat, leaned his arm on the car door, and rubbed his dark stubble with his hand. "When we get a lot of stuff in, there's sometimes too much for the markets to handle. Safely, I mean," he added. "We'd love to push more through, but it has to be a small enough amount that it can be hidden when the pigs or the market inspectors come sniffing round."
"I thought you'd have the inspectors on payroll," Scarlett responded, surprised.
"Some of them we do, but not all of them. And we can't control the police presence. It's too wide for us to handle," he admitted.
"Fair enough." She looked out of the window. "Jane seems all right," she said, changing the subject. "I mean, obviously after you push back a bit," she added. Connor's head immediately swivelled round, and his dark eyes locked onto hers.
"Don't ever be fooled by his friendly face, Scarlett," he warned, his tone serious. "Don't ever let your guard down or assume he's your friend, because he isn't. He's a cold, hard thug who would hurt you in an instant if it meant coming out on top. That playful banter he afforded you back there was because you were with me." He eyed her hard. "You were safe in there because you're a Drew, no other reason. And even though you're a Drew, until you show them otherwise, they will have in the back of their mind that you're the weak link if they ever need one to break. You need to remember that and take it seriously."
Scarlett pulled a grim expression and looked away. She had clearly been naive in thinking that that conversation was as hard as it would be to get in with the local gangs. She was going to have to do a lot better, she realised, but only time would allow her to do that. Connor looked at her and saw the flush of embarrassment creep up her face.
"Look, it's fine. You wouldn't have known that. But that's why I'm telling you now. Just keep your guard up."
He turned to focus on the road ahead with a small sigh.
"This world is full of dangers, Scar," he said, his tone grim. "Ones you're going to have to pick up on fast if you want to survive it."
Chapter 25. Ruby pulled her hood over her frizzy ginger hair and ducked down slightly as she dashed past the wall that ran along the front of the building she was trying to avoid. She looked down to the ground and pushed her hands deeper into her pockets as she slowed to a fast walk, jumping slightly as the sirens on a passing police car came on. The blue lights flashed and passed her before disappearing around the next corner. She shook her head, feeling stupid for jumping. It wasn't like police sirens going off was an uncommon occurrence around here. The part of the Polthorne estate where she currently resided was a squalid area rife with drugs and thefts and all sorts of other small crimes. Passing the front of her old building, she stared up at the window to her old lounge wistfully. The light was on, which meant someone was in there waiting for her. But she wasn't stupid enough to go home, not now. She owed too many people too much money. Bad people. Another wave of pain rippled through her thin body, and she clamped her jaw against it. The need for her next hit was becoming very real, but she was out of cash, and none of her dealers would give her anything without payment up front anymore. Hurrying through the estate, she headed to the place she was staying. Perhaps Sandy had some cash she could wheedle out of her again. Sandy was one of the local whores, one of the few who worked alone without a pimp. She'd taken pity on Ruby, and was currently allowing her to camp out on her sofa until the heat died down. It was a shithole of a place, and Ruby had to listen to her service customers at all hours of the day and night, but it was far safer than sleeping on the streets. And as far as Ruby was concerned, there was no alternative. Like a lot of addicts, she had a home and a family to go back to if she wanted, but she didn't want to give up the drugs or the level of freedom she so fiercely clung to. She couldn't bear to be around her mother, who would beg and plead with her to get clean, or see the look of disapproval on her brothers' faces. So this was her only option, if she wanted to stay off the streets, for now at least.
Reaching Sandy's flat, she let herself in and headed to the lounge. As she walked in, she paused, almost turning around. Sandy was stark naked on the sofa, her legs splayed, showing the world her wares, and a man of around 50, Ruby guessed, was pumping away at her, grunting with pleasure as he thrust into her again and again. Ruby's presence didn't seem to bother him in the slightest, nor Sandy, who shot her a quick smile of greeting. Ruby debated leaving again, as she'd have to pass the bucking pair to get to the kitchen where she could sit and close the door. But it was getting cold outside, and the longer she was out in the open, the more chance there was of being seen by the wrong people. She gritted her teeth and passed them as swiftly as she could, narrowly avoiding the man's hairy backside as she skirted around him to the kitchen. She closed the door and sat down, placing her elbow on the small table and resting her heavy head in her hand. She closed her eyes as she felt the coolness of her touch on her forehead. She was burning up. Another sign she needed a hit, and soon if she was to avoid going into full withdrawal. She stayed this way with her eyes closed until the groans reached a crescendo and the man finished what he'd come here to do. There was some mumbled conversation by the front door as he left, and then finally it closed. She lifted her head, about to go through to the lounge to speak to Sandy, when she heard another voice. She groaned internally. Sandy's next client was here already, it seemed. She settled back into the chair and debated making a cup of tea when the kitchen door opened and Sandy came in, closing it behind her. Dressed in nothing but a threadbare dressing gown, which she pulled tight around her ample bosom, she took the seat next to Ruby, lit a cigarette, and took a deep drag. She was in her late 30s, but looked almost 10 years older and wasn't in the best physical condition. But she kept her prices and her standards low, and so she was never short of customers from around the local estates. "Are you all right?" she asked, looking at Ruby critically as she smoked. "Not really," Ruby admitted. "I need to get some gear, but I'm out of cash." Ruby looked back at her with a small smile of apologetic hope. "I don't suppose I could borrow some of you, could I? I'll pay it back soon as I can. I just need to get myself straight." Sandy sighed. "I wish I could, but the rent's due this week and the bills are coming out too. I need all I've got." She took another drag and twisted her mouth to one side. "I do have another option for you, though," she added. Ruby looked up at her warily. "What option's that, then?" she asked. "My regular out there just turned up with his mate in tow, asked if I could fit 'em both in. I have another appointment after him, so I was going to say no. If you want to sort him out, then the cash is yours." "No, no way," Ruby said immediately with a strong shake of the head. "I ain't doing that." Sandy shrugged. "Suit yourself," she said, taking another drag. "Just thought I'd give you the option. It ain't that bad, really. A few minutes' work, then it's over, and you got cash in your hand." Ruby felt another wave of pain wash over her, and she squeezed her eyes shut for a moment. She really was getting desperate. But was she really that desperate? As she tensed her muscles against the complaining ache that was settling in, she realized she was. She knew with disappointment that she was getting to the stage where she would do anything at all to avoid withdrawal. "What would I have to do?" she asked in an uncertain tone. "He asked for a suck and a fuck," she stated bluntly. "You insist he puts the cash down first. That's important, don't forget. Then strip down so he's got something to look at, suck him off for 30 seconds or so, then let him do his business. They never take very long. Job done, 40 quid in your pocket."
She shrugged as if it were the most normal thing in the world. Ruby swallowed. She couldn't believe she was even considering selling herself for a measly 40 quid. But what choice did she have? The pain was getting more intense by the minute, and she knew she wouldn't last without her heroin much longer.
"All right," she said in a small voice.
"Good girl," Sandy said approvingly. "You never know, you might find you even like it. I don't mind it myself."
She stubbed the cigarette out in the overflowing ashtray on the table and stood up.
"Come on then, time's money. You can use the bedroom, I'll stay in the lounge."
Ruby rose on wobbly legs, feeling her stomach jump up into her throat at the thought of what she was about to do. She could still back out, she told herself. But she knew she couldn't. She needed that money to stop the pain. There was nothing else for it. She followed Sandy back into the lounge and stared at the two men waiting there. One she recognised. She'd seen him there the week before. He had to be the regular Sandy said she'd expected. Her gaze flicked across to the other, a man of around 40 with salt and pepper stubble around his jaw, small dark eyes, and a rounded beer belly popping out of an otherwise slight frame. His T-shirt had a stain on it, she noticed abstractly.
"Ruby, this is Wes. Wes, Ruby." Sandy made the introductions. "She'll take care of you today."
Ruby saw his little eyes light up as they raked over her body, and she suppressed a shudder. Sandy gave her a nudge and she stumbled forward, the increasing ache in her body reminding her why she was doing this.
This way,"
she said awkwardly, walking into the only bedroom in the small flat. She heard the door close behind her, and she took a deep breath before turning round. As she turned, she realised he was already undoing the belt on his trousers and was watching her with a feral hunger in his eyes.
"Money first," she snapped, making him pause.
"All right, how much?"
he asked in a gruff tone.
40, on the table."
She gestured towards the small wooden bedside table and waited as he pulled the money out of his wallet and placed it down.
"There, okay?"
he asked. She nodded.
"Okay."
He pulled his T-shirt over his head, revealing a hairy torso beneath, then continued with the belt buckle and began to pull down his trousers. Ruby averted her gaze and reluctantly began stripping off her own clothes. As she got down to her underwear, every instinct was to cover up, but she forced herself to carry on. She felt her cheeks burn, but even as they did, she felt the wail of the monster inside her even more prominently, begging her to get its medicine. She looked up at him with determination. Nothing mattered but getting those drugs. Nothing mattered but getting his money. Her gaze lowered to his hand, which was now casually massaging his erect penis. It was larger than she'd expected, but not the largest she'd ever seen. It would be fine, she reasoned. It was a business transaction. Her body for his money. Wes reached over and grabbed one of her breasts, squeezing it a little hard, and she made a small sound of shock. She wasn't sure why she hadn't been expecting it, but as he made a sound of approval, she felt the bile rise in her throat and swallowed it down with difficulty. She forced herself not to recoil as his hand wandered down to the area between her legs, and he roughly pushed his fingers into her most private parts.
"Oh, yeah,"
he moaned under his breath.
"Sit down, then," he ordered.
Ruby did as she'd been asked, knowing what was coming. He wanted to be in her mouth. He wanted to get what he'd come for. She perched on the bed and braced herself as he came towards her. Her small brown eyes widened as he pushed himself towards her face and grabbed the back of her neck. She automatically opened her mouth to protest, and as she did, he thrust himself in there with a loud groan of pleasure. Ruby felt him fill her mouth and almost gagged as he began to move back and forth. She closed her eyes and reminded herself over and over that this was what she had to do. It was what she'd chosen to do, to get what she needed. But after a few thrusts, she couldn't stop the wave of nausea and pulled back, gasping for breath in order to stop herself from throwing up. Wes paused for a moment, then shrugged.
"All right then, straight to it."
He pushed her back on the bed and lifted her knees up in one swift movement, spreading them apart and positioning himself between her legs. He stared down over his protruding belly at her vagina and licked his lips in anticipation as he lined himself up. Still gulping in air, Ruby blinked, not mentally ready for this next stage yet. But before she had a moment to process it, he pressed forward and pushed roughly inside. She gasped as she felt him thrust as deep as he could get. Taking her gasp as a sign of pleasure rather than a sign of shock, Wes was spurred on and began to pull back and forth, quickly getting into a fast rhythm and working himself into a frenzy. He groaned and moaned as the friction began to push him towards the brink of explosion. His mouth gaped open, and his breaths became almost laboured as he bucked into her again and again. As she stared up at him, at the stranger she'd just met, who was old enough to be her dad, she was suddenly filled with revulsion. She felt him inside her, filling her, using her, and her whole body suddenly felt tainted. She tried to push him off. "Stop," she said. He either didn't hear her or ignored her, but either way he continued having sex with her, his panting intensifying. "I said, stop," she said louder. This time he looked down at her quizzically, but still didn't stop, dismissing her words as he focused on reaching the finish line. Ruby started to panic, sex with him now feeling more wrong than anything ever had before. "I said, stop," she yelled, pushing him off her with force. He looked down on her, anger colouring his face. "What the fuck are you playing at?" he growled. He reached forward and grabbed her legs again, forcing her back into position, this time with a strength she hadn't realised he possessed. He shoved her legs apart easily, despite her resistance, and pushed himself back inside her, thrusting harder this time, pushing painfully far in. "I said, fucking stop!" she yelled again, her own anger coming to the fore. He was momentarily taken off guard by the change in her tone, and she used the opportunity to push back off him once more. This time she didn't just stop there, knowing he would only continue to rape her if she gave him the chance. Putting all her strength behind it, she kicked out at his groin hard and felt momentary elation as her foot hit its mark. Wes cried out in shock and pain and fell to the floor, rolling around in agony as he held his privates. As quick as lightning, Ruby shot off the bed and shoved on her trousers. Stepping into her trainers and throwing her top over her head as she moved, she grabbed the money off the side. Whether he agreed or not, she'd more than earned it. Pausing for a split second as she eyed his trousers on the floor, she then bent down and snatched his wallet out of the pocket. She'd seen the wedge he'd had in there when he'd pulled out her payment earlier, and it was a damn sight more than 40 quid. "Hey, what the fuck?" She realised Wes had caught on, and swiftly turned and ran out of the small bedroom before he could try and grab the wallet back.
Sandy was walking towards her on the other side of the door, pulling her gown around her waist.
"Ruby?"
she asked, confused.
"What's going on?"
Ruby didn't stop to answer. Instead, she ran out through the front door and down the street until she was well away from the small flat and its sordid inhabitants. She ran and ran until what little strength she had left was spent. Once she felt confident enough that she wasn't being followed, she slowed to a walk and pulled her hood up over her hair. With the initial danger now behind her, tears began to fall down her cheeks unchecked. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to walk off the dirty feeling all over her body from what she'd just done. Why had she done that? But even as she asked herself, she knew the answer. She needed to find a more permanent solution to her money issues, because she knew now that she could never bring herself to do that again. And she didn't want to be in a position where she had no other choice again. She shivered, and her hand tightened around the wallet she'd just stolen. She needed to get to her dealer and buy enough to see her through the next few days. Once she'd had a hit, she'd be able to think clearly and work out what she was going to do, because she couldn't go back there, not after what she'd just done. Sandy wouldn't welcome her back now. With a shake of her head, she put Sandy out of her mind. Right now, she just needed to get some heroin in her system. But as she changed direction, she clocked the man staring at her from just a few yards away and froze. Turning back the way she'd come, she bolted, running as fast as her aching legs would carry her. Chapter 26. Scarlett locked the car and walked up the front path towards the house, glad to be home. It had been a long day. After doing the laundry rounds with Connor and learning as much as she could about the people they worked with, she'd put in a few hours on the paperwork at the factory. It was a simple enough operation. She'd figured out the general way of things already, but she wanted to make sure she understood everything inside out. It had only been once she'd reached the bottom of a pile of paperwork that had been waiting to be sorted for a while that she realised it was already dark outside, and much later than she'd thought. Lily had left a few hours before, off to sort out some other issues that weren't to do with the factory, and the production line had long turned quiet. She'd packed up for the day, grabbed her bag and headed on home, ready to take a long soak in the bath and go to bed. For the first time since her father had died, she was actually looking forward to going to bed. Every night so far she'd lain awake, locked in her grief, crying herself into an uneasy sleep. But today she was so tired that although she had no doubt that she'd still end up having a cry, she'd most likely fall asleep pretty quickly from exhaustion. It was a welcome thought in the darkness they were all currently trapped in. She let herself in and walked through to the kitchen, where a plate sat on the side wrapped in cling film. It was a simple meal, chicken salad with some coleslaw, but the fact that Kath had dragged herself out of her grief-induced trance long enough to make it for her lifted Scarlett's hopes. She'd been looking after her mother since it all happened, making her food, putting her to bed, trying to get her to get up and move around in the day. So to find Kath had been in the kitchen putting food together for her was a good sign. Wearily, Scarlett dumped her bag on the kitchen island and pulled back the cling film. She picked at a stray piece of coleslaw with her fingers, popping it in her mouth before reaching into the drawer for a fork. "You're back!" Kath's voice surprised her slightly. She hadn't heard her approach. "Oh, hey," she said with a tired smile. "Yeah, sorry. I was engrossed in paperwork. I didn't realise the time." "Paperwork?" Kath asked with a sceptically raised eyebrow. "Yeah, there was some stuff that had been piling up. It needed sorting. Took some time," Scarlett answered.
Sure.
Kath slurred the word slightly and sauntered in from the hallway.
If paperwork is what we're calling it now.
Scarlett paused and her gaze dropped to the glass of wine in her mother's hand.
How many of those have you had? She asked. What, wines?
Kath asked, sitting down heavily in one of the dining chairs.
A few.
She took another sip. Scarlett pursed her lips and balled the cling film up in her hand before dropping it in the bin. She took a mouthful of her dinner and leaned forward onto her elbows as she chewed. Kath often had a few drinks with family or friends, but never enough to get drunk like this. And considering the fact she hadn't, to Scarlett's knowledge, touched a drop since the night of Ronan's murder, this was a little concerning.
So what have you really been up to?
Kath asked.
I just told you, Scarlett replied between mouthfuls. Paperwork. Right.
Kath made a snorting sound of disbelief.
You know, you might as well just be honest with me, Scarlett.
Scarlett frowned, irritated, and stood upright, putting down her fork.
I'm not lying to you, Mum. I've been sat in the office all afternoon doing paperwork. I'm trying to learn the business. And yes, both sides, she added. You know that.
Kath's eyes flashed with anger.
Oh, there we go. He's not cold in his grave. Well, not even in his grave at all yet. And here you are in that viper's clutches already. That's enough, Scarlett snapped, turning to her mother.
She took a deep breath and tried to calm her tone.
Aunt Lil has done nothing wrong, and I was always going to end up choosing this path, whether Dad was alive or not, she lied.
There was no point riling Kath more by revealing just how close she'd been to leaving. Not now. She closed her eyes and exhaled.
I don't want to hurt you, she said, but I've joined the firm and that's all there is to it.
She lifted her chin a little higher.
I'm not discussing it again.
Kath's cheeks filled with colour.
Well then, she said bitterly, you're heading down the same fucking path that killed your father.
Suddenly a deep rage seemed to overpower her, and she hurled her wineglass across the dining room. It smashed against the wall and fell to the floor in tiny pieces.
What the hell?
Scarlett exclaimed in shock. Kath had always had some fight in her, but she'd never seen her lash out like this before Ronan's death. Wine dripped down into the puddle below, but Kath didn't seem to care.
What are you doing, Scarlett?
Kath continued, her words turning into a loud wail.
What am I doing? Scarlett retorted. I'm working, Mum. I'm picking up where Dad left off. I'm joining the rest of my family and trying to carry on his legacy. His legacy?
Kath barked out a bitter laugh.
That ain't his legacy, Scarlett. You are. Not that foul, dirty worldie and Lil worked in. He didn't want you there. Not really.
She shouted, standing up and pointing at her daughter.
He wanted you to be clean and safe, not dragged down by that sister of his. What he wanted was for me to join him, and you know it, Scarlett shot back, anger bubbling away inside her. You just don't want to admit that to yourself.
She eyed her hard, trying to keep on top of her emotions.
No, you need to stop slagging Lily off. Just because you're drunk, it ain't an excuse. We all miss Dad, all of us. But we have to carry on as best we can, and for me, that's by carrying on with my life as best I can. That ain't a life, Scarlett, she spat. You have a chance, a real chance to make a good life for yourself at that university, the way neither of us did. And you're chucking it away, for what? He'd be ashamed of you, Scarlett, if he could see you now.
If we could see you throwing yourself away into that criminal world of hers."
"For fuck's sake!" Scarlett roared.
Kath blinked and swayed slightly, shocked by the unusual outburst. Scarlett took a deep, shaky breath to control her anger and placed her hands on her hips for a moment before continuing. "I'll tell you something now, Mum," she said through gritted teeth. "He'd be damn proud of me if he were here, and don't you ever tell me otherwise again." Her voice rose and wobbled slightly. She swallowed. "And Dad did what he did because it was in his blood. It was who he was. It's who we all are. I'm not throwing St. Andrews away for nothing. I'm choosing another path. I'm going into the family business that Dad built with all his heart and soul. A business he chose and loved. Not one he was forced into. Neither of us have been forced, not by Lil or anyone. And the sooner you realise that, the better." Without waiting for her mother's response, Scarlett grabbed her bag and walked back out the front door, slamming it behind her. Chapter 27. Lily walked to the door with a slight frown. She hadn't been expecting anyone tonight. She peered through the peephole and her frown turned into a look of surprised recognition. She opened it and stepped back, giving Scarlett room to walk in. "What's wrong?" she asked, noticing the red rims around her niece's eyes straight away. "Oh, it's just—" Scarlett put her hands to her face for a moment and shook her head. "It's just Mum. Can I please stay with you tonight?" "Of course you can," Lily replied, closing the door. Her frown reappeared, though this time in concern. "What happened?" Scarlett put her bag on the stairs and headed for the study, where her aunt liked to sit in the evenings. "She's had a few too many and started mouthing off about Dad and about me working in the firm." She sat down in one of the armchairs. Lily raised her eyebrows. "I see." She had an inkling there had probably been a few choice comments about her too, but if so, Scarlett was tactfully keeping these to herself. "She threw her glass at the wall," Scarlett said, shooting her aunt a look. "I don't think I've ever seen her do anything like that. There was wine and glass all over the place, and she just didn't care. But it wasn't that. It was the comments she made about Dad. I just saw red. I needed to get out." She rubbed her eyes tiredly. Lily pulled a grim expression. It was only natural that Scarlett had made her way here. The two of them had always had a close connection, even when she'd been small. Lily was the one Scarlett turned to, and they understood each other better than the rest of the family did. But although she felt for her niece and wanted to support her, she knew Kath was suffering, and her inbuilt need to protect everyone forced her to speak neutrally. "Your mum only has you now, you know," she said, resting her head back on the chair and staring through the wall. "She's lost your dad, and she's scared she'll lose you too, and she doesn't know how to process everything." She sighed. "I'm surprised she's drinking, though. That was never her style." "No, me too," Scarlett replied. Lily glanced at her. Her niece looked tired and drawn. Her pale face was whiter than usual, and her bright grey-blue eyes looked heavy and dull for once. "You need a drink yourself," she said. "What do you fancy?" "Have you got vodka?" "Of course," Lily replied and walked over to her loaded drinks trolley. "With?" "Whatever you've got, I don't mind." Lily busied herself with pouring Scarlett a vodka with soda and lime, and added a couple of cubes of ice from the small bucket she'd brought in earlier for her own drinks. It wasn't surprising that the two were arguing. Kath seemed to be arguing with everyone at the moment.
She handed Scarlett the glass. Scarlett smiled back gratefully. Picking up her gin and tonic from where she'd left it earlier, she sat back down. "You can sleep in Ruby's room. The bed's made up," she said.
"Thanks,"
Scarlett replied. She took a deep drink from her glass and rested her head back in the seat. As her shoulders finally dropped, so did her brave front, and her misery began to show in her face.
"I really miss him, Aunt Lil,"
she said quietly, emotion colouring her words. Lily turned to see 2 silent tears slowly running down her niece's cheeks. She felt her own eyes prickle at this and swiftly blinked them away, swallowing hard. She missed him too, more than anyone could imagine.
"I know you do,"
she said, once she'd gained outward control of herself. "I know it must feel as though a chunk of your heart is being ripped out." She reached across and squeezed Scarlett's hand as the girl bent her head and finally gave in to the flood of tears. "And that's okay. All that means is that you loved him and that he mattered, and that's how it should be." She nodded and clamped her mouth shut as her own emotions threatened to spill over once more. Scarlett squeezed Lily's hand back and took a deep breath, wiping her tears with her other hand.
"I just never expected him to be gone. That's stupid, I know. We all end up saying goodbye one day. But I just didn't think it would be now. Not yet. He was still so young."
Lily nodded and struggled to maintain her composure. "Yep," she managed tightly, before biting down on her lip. She sniffed and straightened up, clearing her throat. She looked down at the glass in her hand and focused on the clear liquid within, watching the chunks of ice make their slow journey around the rising bubbles. Mentally, she gathered up all of her pain and balled it into a sphere of angry energy. As she allowed her thoughts to circulate around it, she felt the pain dull to a more controllable fury, and she took a deep breath, releasing it and allowing the tension in her shoulders to drop. Anger she could cope with. Anger she welcomed. "Whoever did this has a lot to answer for, Scarlett. And I promise you, they will pay when we find out who they are." She nodded slowly, staring through the study wall into a future only she could see. An eye for an eye, the Bible says, because even God agrees that when someone does you wrong, you have no choice but to pay them back in kind. Chapter 28. Scarlett woke slowly, the hazy comfort of sleep still lingering as she gathered her thoughts. The pillow her head rested upon was fluffy, and the sheets were warm and soft on her skin as she lay embraced in comfort. It wasn't her bed, however, and it was as she remembered the previous evening that the memory of Ronan's death came crashing back into her mind too, like a boulder of pain. Her heart sank back down into the rut it had been caught in for the last couple of weeks, and she squeezed her eyes shut hard for a second, bracing herself against the grief, before pulling herself up into a half-upright position. As she sat up, she realised she wasn't alone. Someone was sitting in the chair across the room, watching her, and as her head swivelled and she focused on who it was, she almost let out a small groan. The frizzy red hair, sharp nose, and naturally downturned mouth could belong to no one but her least favourite cousin. "I turned my back for 5 minutes, and there you are, jumping in my grave," Ruby said in a low, dangerous voice. Scarlett sighed and sat up with a withering look at her older cousin. "Hello, Ruby," she said resignedly. "It's been a while." It clearly has, Goldilocks, Ruby replied with a sneer. Now get out of my fucking bed, or this little bear's going to eat you for breakfast.
Scarlett padded downstairs and pulled the long, warm cardigan her aunt had lent her the night before around her waist. Ruby followed, her feet thumping loudly on each step behind.
"Scarlett?"
Lily called from the kitchen. Scarlett turned towards her voice, thankful that she'd be able to palm her cousin off on her aunt. Lily would deal with her. She was the only one who could. She entered the kitchen to find Lily pouring out 2 cups of coffee.
"Was that you on the stairs just now? I thought I heard—"
Lily's frown turned from one of confusion to one of surprise.
"Ah.
Hello, Ruby," she said cautiously.
Coffee?"
She lifted one eyebrow in question and reached for a 3rd cup. Scarlett sat down at the end of the breakfast bar, purposely away from her cousin, and grabbed one of the already filled cups.
"So you assume the thumping had to be me, then?"
Ruby asked petulantly.
"Does Princess Scarlett not make noise when she moves? She floats above the fucking carpet, does she, in all her glory?"
"No floating," Lily replied, eyeing her daughter with a mixture of hope and wariness. "And I never assume anything."
"Oh, whatever!"
Ruby spat back sarcastically. Lily sighed and softened her tone. "It's nice to see you, Ruby. If this is a social call," she added carefully.
"Well, of course it's a social call. What else would it be?"
Scarlett turned her face away so that Ruby wouldn't see the blatant look of disbelief upon it. Lily did, however, she realised, as she caught her eye briefly by mistake. But her aunt didn't react. Ruby was a live wire, a loose cannon in the Drew family. Lily had given up trying to keep her close a long time ago, because the more she tried to keep her in check, the worse her behaviour seemed to become. Ruby would turn up from time to time, though, like a bad penny, always when she wanted something. In fact, Scarlett couldn't remember a time that Ruby had come to visit her mother just for the sake of seeing her. She doubted Lily could either. "So, how are things?" Lily asked brightly. "What have you been up to?" Scarlett saw the wistful expression her aunt so quickly hid and felt a spark of pity for her. It had killed her, the way Ruby chose to live her life, and the fact that she had no control over her daughter's self-destruction. Lily always wanted to save everyone in the family, but some people were just beyond saving. Ruby sat down at the other end of the breakfast bar warily, taking the cup of coffee that Lily offered.
"Things are all right," she said gruffly. "Well, they were until I came home to visit and found someone else had taken my place in me own house, in me own bed." She shot a scathing look at Scarlett, who purposely ignored it.
"Scarlett was just staying the night, Ruby," Lily replied. "Your bed was made up, and I had no idea you were planning to visit. You didn't let me know you were coming, as usual."
"I couldn't let you know I was coming because my phone was stolen."
She nodded, as if agreeing with her own story, and Scarlett resisted the urge to shake her head. Her cousin had never been very good at lying, for someone who so often depended on lies to get what she wanted.
"I was attacked and mugged. They took everything I had. My phone, my bag, every penny I had to my name was in that bag. They took everything."
Her tone was heavy with self-pity, but neither Scarlett or Lily reacted with shock. Instead, they shared a glance over Ruby's hung head before Lily addressed the statement. "How terrible that must have been for you, Ruby," she replied evenly. "What did the police say?"
"Well, I didn't go to the police."
Drews don't go to the police. What if they started looking into the family? I had to protect you all, didn't I?"
Ruby blustered. "But you aren't part of the firm, Ruby," Lily responded. "There's no need to keep something as terrible as an attack to yourself."
"Well, I did all the same,"
Ruby said with a sour face.
"To protect you. We have to look out for our own, don't we?"
Scarlett pursed her lips and stared out of the window. The only person Ruby Drew had ever looked out for was herself. "Well, that's very valiant of you, Ruby," Lily replied, her tone neutral. "And if that's really the case, then thank you." Ruby ignored the inference and took up a look of superior martyrdom.
"You're welcome," she said. "So that's why I couldn't call ahead. I have no phone now."
She quickly dropped her face, glancing up briefly at Lily to see if it was having any effect. Lily sighed. Clearly Ruby wanted to lead her somewhere, so got right to it. "Well, when did the attack happen?" she asked, her gaze piercing Ruby's intently.
"Oh, it was a couple of days ago," she replied.
"So what, Tuesday?"
Yeah, Tuesday," she confirmed.
"Where?"
"What?"
"Where did it happen? Where were you attacked?" Lily continued, her gaze never leaving Ruby's face.
"In this alleyway I was walking through,"
she responded, a tinge of red beginning to colour her pale cheeks. "Where was the alley?"
"Jesus, what is this, 20 questions?"
Ruby cried, rolling her eyes. "No, I just want to know, Ruby. Where was the alley?" Lily pressed.
"Down near Mile End, off Alfred Street somewhere, all right?" "Christ, it's like telling a bleeding Nazi rather than me own mum," she complained.
"Alfred Street. OK, no problem." Lily stood up and took a sip of her coffee. "I'll have one of your brothers check it out, see if there were any shops with CCTV nearby that might have picked it up."
"What? Why?"
Ruby asked, sitting up straighter sharply. "To see if we can find out who mugged you, of course," Lily replied. "Maybe we can get your phone back, but if not, at least your brothers can give whoever hurt you a good kicking. Like you say." She took another sip. "We have to look after our own."
"Well..."
Ruby's mouth flapped open and shut a few times.
"There weren't no cameras where I was. I checked."
"You checked?"
"I checked, yeah."
Ruby's gaze flicked away as she shifted uncomfortably. "Which end did you say it was on Alfred Street?" Lily pushed.
"I didn't."
Ruby shot back, beginning to lose her temper.
"Oh, forget it. You don't believe me. You never fucking believe me. Here I am after being attacked, beaten half to death I was, and you couldn't give a shit. I didn't even report it because all I could think of was protecting you, and now I'm broke with nothing because of it. And what do I get? Nothing. That's what I get."
Scarlett rolled her eyes and turned towards her cousin. "Oh, please, beaten half to death," she repeated. "There's not a bruise on you." She looked pointedly down at her cousin's bare arms and at the pale, unblemished skin above her low-cut top.
"And what do you fucking know?"
Ruby rounded on her cousin, enraged by the fact she'd called her out.
"Why are you even here anyway? Ain't you got somewhere to be?"
"All right, that's enough," Lily interjected. "Stop it, both of you." Scarlett exhaled heavily and stood up, deciding to leave the conversation. It wasn't her argument anyway. "Actually, I do have somewhere to be," she said. "I'm going to grab a shower if that's okay, Lil?" "Of course. Grab a towel from the airing cupboard," Lily replied, her placid expression unchanged during the course of the conversation.
"Lil!"
Ruby repeated, her eyebrows shooting up indignantly.
"She's your aunt, you know, you cheeky cow. Turn 18 and think you can suddenly waltz around talking to my mum like she's an equal, do ya?
Scarlett took one last sip of her coffee and walked through the kitchen past her cousin.
She's also my boss, and we decided to drop the title for the sake of professionalism. Not all of us grow up to be work-shy, Ruby.
She shot over her shoulder as she made her way up the stairs.
Who the fuck does she think she is?
Scarlett heard Ruby exclaim as she nipped up the stairs towards the bathroom. Oh, Ruby, she doesn't think anything. Leave her alone, she heard Lily reply as she picked out a towel. Now let's get down to what you're actually here for, shall we? I was hoping it might have been to see me, but clearly not, the sounds of things. Scarlett closed the bathroom door and turned on the shower, grateful for the water blocking out the sound of her cousin's response. Half an hour later she came down the stairs, combing her fingers through her long wet hair and listening warily in case Ruby was still carrying on. When she reached the bottom without hearing any further arguments, she paused, unsure why the house was so silent. Lily's tight blonde curls bounced around the side of the lounge door as she stuck her head out. "I'm in here," she said. Scarlett walked in and sat opposite her aunt on one of the plush beige sofas, curling her legs up beneath her. She was slightly constricted in the tight black knee-length dress of Lily's she'd borrowed, but she managed to get comfortable enough in the end. She looked around. "Where's Ruby?" she asked. "Gone." Lily looked down, and Scarlett caught the sorrow that flitted across her features. She nodded her understanding. "What was she after?" she asked. "Money, as usual," Lily replied with a sad smile. "I'm sorry," Scarlett said. "Don't be. It's not the first time, and it won't be the last. I gave her enough to sort herself out for a while, but we'll see what happens." Scarlett nodded and looked away out of the window at the cloudy skies beyond. She knew what that meant. They all did. Ruby Drew was down on her luck, so this was most likely only the first of several visits until she rinsed all she could from them and outstayed her welcome. Her jaw formed a hard line. This was a bad time for her cousin to be distracting Lily with emotional drama, because right now Lily was the only real strength they had holding off the appearance of vulnerability within the firm. With Ronan gone, the vultures were circling. But, whether they liked it or not, it seemed they would be seeing more of her problematic cousin yet. Chapter 29. Ian Walker watched the clock in the outer hallway of his workplace as the second hand moved ever closer to the top. As it finally clicked over 5 p.m, he pushed his ID card down in the clocking out slot with a satisfied smile. It was Friday, the pub was calling him, and he had absolutely no intention of keeping it waiting by spending a moment more than he had to at work. He wasn't one of these crazy people who lived to work. Oh no, not Ian. He worked to live. He did what he had to do each day to get the salary it warranted paid into his account at the end of each month, and that was it. He whistled cheerfully and swung his jacket over one shoulder as he pushed through the back door into the outside world. He drew the air into his lungs with gusto, already mentally forming his excuses as to why he couldn't get home to watch the soaps and eat Chinese with his wife Teresa. He tipped his head towards another couple of guys he knew as they came in to start their shifts and turned the corner towards the rear car park. His jaunty, energetic pace slowed to a stroll as he caught sight of the 2 men standing by his car. One of them had his back to him, staring out towards the busy main road behind, and the other was half sitting on the bonnet, smoking a cigarette. Both were smartly dressed in black suits and shiny shoes. Both had neatly cropped black hair, chiselled jaws, and dark brown eyes. And he still, despite the years he'd known them, couldn't tell them apart until they started talking. The only difference he could make out between the Drew brothers was that Connor was routinely more serious. Glancing back over his shoulder to make sure no one was watching, he made his way over. "All right, lads," he said cheerily. He glanced back again, feeling uncomfortable at how exposed their meeting was. They didn't usually come to the depot. "Wasn't expecting to see you here. Everything okay?" The one leaning against his car just smiled as he drew in another inhalation of smoke, and the one who was standing turned around and walked over, hands shoved into his pockets. "We were in the area," he said, cutting straight to the point. "I need the route for that truck full of High Street stuff coming in next weekend. You got it for us?" "Oh," thought Ian, "this one's Connor." "Not on me, but I can go back and get it," he said, half hoping they'd let him deliver it the following day as initially planned instead. "Good," Connor replied. He glanced at Killian, and his brother stood up, flicking the cigarette away and blowing out the last of the smoke from his lungs. "We'll wait for you in the Old Frog. Don't be too long." "Course, I'll meet you there," Ian replied to their retreating backs. "Fuck's sake," he muttered under his breath, making sure it was too quiet to sneak into their hearing. There went the early start to his Friday night after all. Killian twirled the beer mat around on the table in front of him, watching the door. Connor faced him, looking at some point in the distance behind him. He had seemed annoyed and distracted all day. "What's up?" Killian finally asked. Connor's attention slowly wandered back to the table. "What's up with you? You seem off. Everything all right?" "Yeah, I'm fine," Connor replied with a dismissive shake of the head. He sat up straighter and took a sip of his pint. "Just thinking about Scar." "What about her?" Killian asked, twirling the beer mat again. He'd been surprised too at the sudden turnaround with Scarlett. One day she was just their kid cousin, the next day she was all grown up and one of them. It was a big change. But then life was full of change, and they'd all had to jump in the deep end at one point. "She's so young, that's all. I'm not sure she's ready for all of this." Killian gave a small shrug. "We were younger than her when we jumped in," he reminded him. "But we were always set to join the firm. We knew what was what from the start. Mum never shielded us from it. There was no big shock when it came to it," Connor replied. "Plus, she's a girl." "And? What about it?" Killian said with a frown. "Mum's a girl. I'd like to see you repeat that to her," he chuckled. Connor rolled his eyes. "Okay, maybe that's unfair, but she's still green. She ain't as hard as us." Killian's gaze shot up towards his brother's face, and he studied his double thoughtfully. Connor was a smart man, but sometimes he didn't see everything that he and Lily did. Scarlett wasn't some delicate little butterfly. Her mind was razor sharp, and she had a strength in her that would serve her well in their way of life. It was raw and unharnessed, yes, but she had her father's head on her shoulders. Lily was throwing her in at the deep end on purpose. There was no point pussyfooting into this world. They resided in deep, dark waters, and anyone who came to join them either had to sink or swim. But Scarlett would swim. He knew she would. Lily knew that too. Connor just needed to have a little more faith. "I think you underestimate her, Connor," he said. "Give her time. Let her win a few challenges. I think she'll surprise you." "Maybe so," Connor conceded. "But in the meantime, we have to make protecting her a priority. Not so that she knows, of course, but we need to keep her safe." "Of course," Killian agreed. "That's why we're here, ain't it?" He gave his brother a wry smile. "Mum might run things, but we protect this family, all the family, through thick and thin, to the last breath." "To the last breath," Connor repeated,
chinking his pint glass against his brother's. Killian's gaze flickered up to the door and back as it opened. "Heads up," he said quietly. Connor cleared his throat and set his face into a hardened expression as Ian sat down on the chair between the two brothers. "OK, I've got the route details," he said, looking around and shifting in his seat uncomfortably. Ian was a shift manager at one of the largest truck depots in the east of England, and the man they paid to feed them the highly protected routes for the trucks they hijacked. The depot had hundreds of trucks coming and going or passing through in any one day. So many companies used the depot that the brothers were able to hit one every now and then without coming under any serious suspicion. Ian was lazy, though, and the brothers purposely kept him on his toes to make sure he delivered everything they needed. Whilst the lure of the money he made off them was more than enough motivation to get involved, he was a middle-aged man who had no real ambition and who had settled into the comfortable rut of routine over time. He was all for the easy options in life. "About time," Connor said curtly, his dark gaze boring into the older man's. "Let me see what we're dealing with." Ian swallowed and reached into his pocket, pulling out a folded and crumpled set of papers. He laid them out on the table and tried, rather unsuccessfully, to uncrease them with the heel of his hand. "Here we go." He pointed at the trail marked on the map, and then to the second sheet with the timings. "This route's a bit more direct than what you usually like to hit, but there is a leg here." He leaned over and squinted at the map, finding the point he was looking for with his finger. "This is where they come off the main roads through the country for a bit. It's a small window, but it's pretty rural there for a few miles." Killian pulled the paper closer towards them, eyed the section Ian had indicated, and twisted his face in uncertainty. It wasn't a big area. No room for mistakes or delays if other people happened to be on the road. He followed the route back, looking for another option, but there wasn't one. "You don't like it," Connor stated, reading his face. "I don't," Killian agreed. "Do you?" "No, not really. It's not in the best area for transporting it either." "You want to take the old truck?" Killian asked, surprised. "I don't think we'd have time for an offload here," Connor said reluctantly. "It's too close to civilization. We'd have to hit fast and get in and out quick." "It's more risky than usual," Killian added. "But it's a big haul," Connor countered. "We could leave a longer break before the next one if we wanted." The brothers stared at each other for a few moments, each mulling it over. "We could stage a block behind, divert any potential traffic," Killian mused. They'd done it before, when the window of opportunity had been tight. They'd had some of the men who worked for them pose as road workers to make sure they were undisturbed. "We'll have to take the driver, too. This isn't rural enough to hide him in the woods. Plus, after last time..." Connor pulled a face. "What happened last time?" Ian asked, curiosity written all over his features. The brothers glared at him, and he immediately dropped his gaze to the table, his cheeks colouring. They turned back to the route. "It's doable," Killian said eventually. "Let's pull some of the boys in and work it out properly." "OK." Connor turned to Ian. "Are these photocopies?" "Of course," he replied as the brothers stood up either side of him. "Good. We were never here. You never saw us," Connor said with a warning glance. Yep, no problem," Ian stuttered. Without another word, the twins turned and walked out of the pub, the photocopies of the route safely tucked in Connor's pocket. Chapter 30. Harry Snow walked through the busy Roman road market slowly, his knuckles white with stress as he gripped the top of his cane. He didn't really need the cane to walk. He wasn't that old and had no debilitating condition in his legs, but he found that it helped to focus some of the involuntary jerks his body made when he was in a crowded area. His neck twitched his head to the side, and the muscles stayed taut as a loud group of children ran past. He gritted his teeth and forced his head back into a straighter position. Dave stood by his side, matching his boss's slow pace and not commenting on his clear discomfort out of respect. 2 more men walked a few paces behind, there for their muscle and nothing more. Harry Snow was a shrewd businessman, but wasn't blind to his own weaknesses. His business crossed over into the underworld, and he found he had the stomach for the more violent side of it from a distance. But he wasn't physically violent himself, and so he made sure to keep a selection of men at hand to carry out that side of things for him, and to protect him from anyone who wished to do him harm. They reached a fruit stall and he paused, reaching for a punnet of cherries.
"How much?"
he asked, his gaze flickering between the woman selling the fruit and the punnet in his hand.
£2, love,
she called back. He reached into his pocket and pulled out some change, handing it over as she put the cherries in a brown paper bag. His gaze moved across the busy market and settled on a large clothing stall a few meters away. A woman shouted out the deals available and sorted some change from the money bag around her waist when a customer walked over with a couple of T-shirts.
"Here you are."
The woman handed over the paper bag, and he passed it to one of the men behind to hold for him.
"The lad, 3 o'clock, leaning against the wall,"
Dave said quietly. Harry slid his gaze to the side and homed in on the young man Dave was referring to. He looked around 18, maybe 20, dressed in a loud tracksuit with an equally loud cap, smoking a cigarette. He was also surveying the area, subtly, but not so subtly that they couldn't clock who he was. He was the Watcher. It was his job to check the area for police and market inspectors. As they watched, his hand holding the cigarette paused on the way up to his mouth. He quickly dropped it and tapped something out on the phone in his other hand. Finishing his text, he looked up at the clothing stall and then to 2 or 3 others. The woman on the clothes stall put her hand to her pocket, where he guessed she must have felt her phone buzz. Without bothering to look at it, and after asking the customer she was with to wait for a moment, she turned, reached up above one of the walls of clothes and dropped a sheet. Harry lifted his eyebrows, impressed. The sheet looked as though it was the outer wall of the stall and had prices and offers pinned to it. It was as though the clothes hidden behind had never been there.
"Note those stalls down. That bag stall and the homeware one down there."
He pointed it out.
"The other clothes one down this side just reacted too,"
Dave added.
"Good, that's 4. I know there are more. We'll just need to keep scoping them out."
It pained Harry to have to figure out the Drew's market stalls this way. It took too much time and manpower. They were highly secretive about which stalls they ran for obvious reasons. But figure them out he would, and then he would take them over, one way or another. He'd come himself today just to see the lie of the land, but from tomorrow he would send his men instead. At least now they had a better idea of the setup and a way to spot what they were looking for.
"No muscle by the looks of it,"
Dave said.
"No, there would be no need," Harry answered. "They've got watchers. That's enough for this sort of hustle, unless there's trouble."
"Which there will be,"
Dave replied.
"Which there will be," Harry agreed. "But they don't know that yet."
As they spoke, a young man walked over with a jaunty stride and a coffee in his hand. His floppy brown hair fell over his forehead and he flicked it back, smoothing it into place with his free hand.
"Hello, Jasper,"
Harry said, touching the man's arm briefly in greeting.
"Hello, Dad,"
he replied, looking around with interest. "How's it going?"
"We've clocked a few,"
Harry replied, careful to keep his voice down.
"Walk with me,"
he said, realising that the lad leaning against the wall was watching them with mild curiosity.
"Look at the stalls." "Not my kind of stuff, thanks,"
Jasper replied with a smirk.
"Nor mine, but why would we be wandering through a market like this if we weren't interested in any of the stalls?"
Harry replied, the patience in his tone wearing thin.
"Fair point,"
Jasper conceded. He turned towards the nearest stall and began looking through the old records they sold there with faked interest. Harry stood beside him and nodded to Dave, who melted into the crowd with his other 2 men.
"Have you spoken to your contact about the delay?"
Harry asked, pausing on an old Beatles album with a smidgen of genuine interest.
"I have, but he's not happy,"
Jasper replied with an edge of annoyance.
"I need to start moving things with these stalls. I don't want him going elsewhere." "I'm more than aware of that."
Harry pursed his lips and dropped the album back into the box.
"But we aren't on the playing field we thought we were."
"Well, how much is she likely to want? Maybe we just pay it out, take that initial hit." Jasper turned and they slowly made their way out to the edges of the market.
"I'm not sure. It would be well above what they're worth, though, even if she could be persuaded. They're lucrative outlets for the Drews, and Lily knows it."
"Why did you ever think she didn't?" Jasper ran his hands back through his hair, exasperated.
"I wish you'd figured that out before. I told my contact we could pull this off." "Because I made a wrong assumption. A very wrong assumption,"
Harry replied grimly.
"Let my failing here be a lesson to you," he added. "But we can still pull it off. We're just going to have to use brute force. I'd been hoping to avoid that, but it seems we have little choice."
The more he'd thought about it, the more he realised his best shot was just to take what he needed from under them. There would be comeback from it, sure, but so long as he took them unawares, he would hold the upper hand. He could make sure that there was so much protection around them that they couldn't strike back with any real force. It could anger some of his clients, Ray Renshaw for certain, but at the end of the day they still needed him. And business was business. It would all settle down eventually, no matter how disgruntled they were. He was sure of it. And perhaps to appease clients like Ray after the fact, he could offer Lily a small payment for what he'd taken out of the goodness of his heart. Or perhaps not. He'd see how things went and how he felt at the time.
"Well, however we do it, we need to get the ball rolling," Jasper said grudgingly. "It's a very lucrative contract, and I don't want to lose it." I know,
Harry replied, putting his hand up to stop his son from continuing.
"We will, very soon."
They carried on in silence and made their way out of the market where Dave and his men were waiting for them. Jasper had been working for Harry for the last few years since leaving school, and although he'd slotted into the business well enough, he'd been itching for his own project to run. Harry had offered him several opportunities to take over one of the arms of the company, but that hadn't been enough. He wanted to be a pioneer, start something up on his own. It was something Harry admired in him greatly, but it also left him in a predicament. New business opportunities didn't just turn up every day. However, after going over to France one weekend, Jasper had come home with a sparkle in his eyes. He'd been introduced to a new gentleman who had access to several large warehouses used to store excess stock by big-name brands. He'd worked out a way to fiddle the electronic system to lose 20% of the stock without a trace. It worked all the way back to the client, whose books would be altered without any alert.
It was practically foolproof. All the guy needed was a channel to sell the goods on through. Jasper had quickly told the man that with his shipping contacts, he could get it over without suspicion, so that it could be sold on in the UK, far from its original source. But it couldn't go through normal shops. That would put the product codes back onto the radar, so it had to be the markets. Quick sales, lots of cash, and, most importantly, no paper trail. When Jasper had come to Harry with the venture and asked for his assistance in setting up a market chain, Harry had been more than happy to oblige his only son. It was the perfect setup, other than the small fact that the markets were already run throughout London by several local firms. He'd taken over a couple of setups already, by paying them out and making deals, but some of them were too big to mess with. And then there was Lily. Her chain was just big enough to cover what they needed, her firm just small enough to override. They'd thought after Ronan's death this would be easy. It was now clear that this wasn't the case, but they were still weakened without him, and that was all Harry needed to work things to his advantage.
"We'll sort this out, son," Harry said as they reached the cars. "This is your time, and your business is a good one. So don't you worry about the obstacles still in our way. One way or another, we'll take the Drews' stall chain, and we'll make sure they never see it coming."
Chapter 31. The next couple of weeks passed in a cloud of uneventful yet busy days for all, as Scarlett became more deeply immersed in the business. She'd returned home the night after staying at Lily's to a grudging apology from her mother. They weren't on the best terms, and things were still strained, but they'd settled into a slightly better routine at least, from what she'd told Lily. In the search for her father's killer, Scarlett and Lily had begun quietly looking into their allies. With no suspects left in their pool of enemies, they'd had to start looking closer to home, but they didn't want this to become common knowledge. If it did turn out to be a friend, then they didn't want to alert them to their probes too early, and if it wasn't, then they didn't want to offend them. They were making slow to no progress. They were partly glad of this. No ally had been uncovered to be a secret enemy just yet, but they were also frustrated at being no closer to finding Ronan's killer. In the factory, Scarlett had now taken over most of the paperwork under Lily's watchful eye and had begun suggesting improvements to make things more efficient. She'd met with a couple of their suppliers and had spent more time on the factory floor, learning how everything worked from delivery to output. Lily was impressed by how quickly she'd taken everything in, and although she wouldn't want to test her theory so early in Scarlett's career, she privately believed that should she ever need to leave it under the girl's control for a period of time, at the very least it wouldn't all go to pot. On the other hand, Scarlett still had a long way to go with the rest of the business. She'd picked up the general gist of how they did things with the protection clients, the heists and the stalls, but she still had a lot to prove to the people watching, and there were still a couple of other money-makers they had in the background that she had yet to learn about. Lily leaned in through the open door of Ronan's office. She still couldn't think of it as Scarlett's yet, and knocked on the doorframe to get her niece's attention. "Hey, have you got a minute?" she asked. "Of course," Scarlett replied, closing the lid of her laptop. "What's up?" Lily sat down in the chair on the opposite side of the desk to Scarlett and crossed her slim legs, settling back comfortably and studying her niece with a half-smile. "How's your mother?" she asked, lacing her fingers together in her lap and resting her elbows on the arms of the chair. "She's okay," Scarlett responded, a slight frown marring her usually smooth forehead. "She's still drinking a lot?" Lily inquired.
Yeah, Scarlett sighed. But if I bring it up, the conversation twists into one about personal choices and me working here. She tailed off, shaking her head. I noticed she put a lot away last Sunday, Lily mused. But I guess no one can blame her. She looked over to the picture of her brother smiling with his wife and daughter on the wall. As the familiar ache of loss and guilt tugged at her chest, she refocused on what she'd come in to talk to Scarlett about. Listen, there are a few things you're still not aware of in our business. Oh? Scarlett's frown deepened and her gaze sharpened. What things? You know our main businesses, but there are a couple of smaller things we run on the side that are quite lucrative too. Things your mother was never made aware of. Oh, okay. Intrigue settled into Scarlett's expression, and she leaned forward on the desk. What things? How come she never knew? Your mother knew about our main income and turned a blind eye, as you know. But when we started venturing into certain other areas, we decided to keep it just between those of us who were working them. Your mother wouldn't have understood. It would likely have been the final straw for her, and your father knew this. But she held her hands out to the sides. The money was too good to ignore, and the opportunities were there. We would have been stupid not to take 'em up. What opportunities are we talking? Scarlett asked. Well, for starters, we run an illegal gambling club. A gambling club? Scarlett asked, surprised. Yes, here in the factory, in the basement. Once a month we hold a high-stakes poker game. No paper trail, no register. People like us come to play. They can use their cash with no questions asked. It's private, and what happens in there stays in there. It's a great money spinner, Lily said with a twinkle in her eye. She loved their poker nights. It was one of the few times she felt she could truly have fun and relax, whilst the boys kept a close eye on things and made sure everyone behaved as expected. It was rare that any trouble occurred, as all the crooks who came to these nights didn't want to be taken off the guest list. So even those who had beef with each other tended to keep it to themselves until they were elsewhere. Okay, but why would that be an issue with my mum? Scarlett asked, confused. Lily leaned to the side in her chair and switched her crossed legs around. Around the time that we were thinking about setting this up, I think Father Dan caught wind of it. Father Dan was the priest at the church they'd attended every Sunday since they were children. An ex-boxer and solid part of the local Irish community, Father Dan had been fresh in the game back then and had stayed on ever since, delivering sermons with a passionate tone and the flush of secret pre-service whiskey in his cheeks. They all respected Father Dan, but no one more so than Kath. She hung off his every word. The week before we were going to trial the first game out, Father Dan delivered a very strong sermon on gambling and how it was a sin and would send the immortal soul straight to the devil. Oh, wow, Scarlett said, her eyebrows rising up. Yes. Lily gave a small smile of amusement. Well, that was it, you see. The second we all got home, all Kath would talk about was this sermon. She made everyone swear not to gamble and even stopped your dad doing the lottery. Scarlett laughed. The lottery? Oh, yes, she took it very seriously. Perhaps it took her mind off the other things we were doing. I don't know. But as time went on, she just seemed more and more set on this belief. And so we never told her. So you don't believe poker will send you to hell? Scarlett asked with a laugh. No, Lily replied. Not gambling. Her gaze wandered back to the picture of her brother again. What would he be thinking as he looked down at them all now?
The question of where her soul would end up when she said goodbye to this world had taken up a lot of her headspace over the years. She was faithfully religious and believed wholeheartedly that God would judge them all one day, but she wasn't convinced on the rigidity of their priests' take on things. In the end, after many years of mental debate, she'd decided that although they may be on the wrong side of the law, and although a lot of the things they did were bad, they weren't evil at heart. The things she and her family did were for the good of the people they loved, not because they took pleasure in dark deeds. And when her day came, God would know that, she'd decided.
"What else?" Scarlett asked. Lily focused in on Scarlett. "You said there were some other things."
"Yes."
She sat up a bit straighter and cleared her throat. "We also run an escort service. Your mother wouldn't be pleased about that for obvious reasons. It was easier for Ronan for us all to just keep that private."
"Oh, yes. I doubt she'd have been very happy. So, how does that all work, then?"
"Well, it's only a small business. We keep high-end girls for high-paying clients. They're not as easy to find as you think. Most escorts aren't up to the sort of standards our clients enjoy. Plus, we don't have the manpower to be running more than a handful. They need housing, protection, and negotiators for their clients."
"So, we're pimps," Scarlett said slowly.
"So crass," Lily admonished with a tut of disapproval. "No. The ladies we supply are for company only. They get taken to dinners, parties, conferences, all sorts really. They dress well, make good conversation, and as far as anything else goes, that's their business." Lily pulled her slimline cigarettes out of her pocket and lit up. "We're aware that they do solicit further services, but that money is their own. We only make money from the front on that one."
"It's legal, then?" Scarlett asked.
"Actually, yes," Lily replied, blowing out her smoke. "We put that through the books, and launder a little through there too. Not too much, though, as that gets looked at from time to time."
"To be expected, I suppose," Scarlett mused.
"Indeed."
"So, what input will I be having on these two ventures?" Scarlett asked keenly.
"On the escort side, it's really just the accounts at the moment, which I'll do with you, and management of the website. From time to time one of the girls might need assistance with something, but nothing major." She took another drag on her cigarette, savouring the hit, then blew it out slowly. "As for the gambling, I want you to start coming along, getting to know people." Her deep brown eyes locked onto Scarlett's. "You need to show these people who you are, your strength, the reasons you're going to be a strong leader one day."
"Leader?"
Lily realised a second too late that she'd slipped. She bit the inside of her lip, annoyed. She hadn't wanted to discuss that yet, not for a long time, but surely the girl understood where all of this would one day lead.